Hello everyone, welcome to Vilnius, to our lovely place owned by our long-time corporate member Swedbank in Lithuania. Thanks for Swedbank for this opportunity to gather us all of us here. Today we are having, and I'm opening our annual corporate governance conference. As you know, we are having it every year, and we are matching it together with annual general meeting of BICG members that we held just before the lunch. Before starting the conference and inviting the first speaker, I would like to remember together with you, when we are talking about who are the best candidates, the best suitable candidates to the boards, to the position in the board. And one of the key elements we are always naming that person should be very experienced. That the person who saw in his business career a lot of ups and downs and so on and so on. Because the board usually is the body that has accumulated much more knowledge and experience than the CEO or the management. That's why they can help the management. But looking to the today's situation, I think even having 20 years of the very high level experience either on the boards or the top management positions, naming all these events that were happening last, let's say, 2 years, I think that in the whole world, not talking about the Baltic region, there will be not so many so experienced board members. So that's why this time we named our conference Black Swans in the Boardroom, because I believe that everyone knows the story about the Black Swans, that for many years, maybe hundreds of years, people were not believing that there are such a black swans, only white, but it appeared that they are. So, and now we will be talking today and discussing what to know, how to behave, how to make decisions, and so on and so on. And of course, our speakers will be sharing their insights, their experiences, and so on. So once again, welcome, and I'm very glad to see you all. And we have also some participants are connecting via Zoom platform, and say hello to everyone online. And to make this event even more valuable for each of you, I would like you to introduce the communication platform, and it's called slido.com. So either you will scan this QR code or will write in your mobile device slido.com and enter BICG 2022. Because we have mixed audience. One part of audience is here and another part of the audience is online. So we decided that all the questions will be submitted via this Slido, and then you be able to read these questions. Maybe if you are writing the question, but your colleague is writing even better question, so you can push kind of like, and then this question in the ratings will go up. And during all the conference, after each presentation, we will pick up the most relevant questions, and we'll ask the speakers to comment and to answer. And the rest of the questions we will leave for our interactive discussion that will be at the very last item on our agenda. So if any questions or some difficulties or so, because we have a quite substantial technical support team, so they can help you with everything. Okay, so then we can start. So I would like to invite our first speaker, Mr. Jānis Sārts. He is director at Nato Strategic Communications Center of Excellence, and he will be talking about the impact of geopolitics in the Baltics businesses, right? So, welcome. Applauses.
Well, thank you so much, and I'll be straight with you. I'll more talk about the geopolitics than what would be the impact exactly on the businesses, because of course, if you look at my background, which has been mostly with national security and NATO for more than 20 years, you would assume that I probably am not that well placed to kind of understand what that might mean for the businesses. But what I can do, and I will do in the next half an hour or so, I'll try to give you my view of what is happening right now, why it is happening as it is happening, and what are the perspectives. So bear with me. I'll take out some notes I made for this presentation. So clearly, when somebody talks about geostrategic challenges, it's a nice way to put what does the war in Ukraine by Russia mean to us. I think that's the straightforward way to talk about it. But before going into that, I think we have to first take a look at a bigger picture. Why? Because I think it's important. It gives the context to what is happening in Ukraine and what are the consequences to the Baltic and Baltic Sea region from that. And I think for the bigger picture, we have to understand why Putin was ready to make a decision to go for a full-scale invasion. Of course, part of that was clearly a number of false assumptions were there. But I think some of the assumptions we really have to think about when we think about the bigger picture. And I think these bigger assumptions have been, first, West is in decline. And I think if we think about last 5 to 6 years, that has been the basic narrative. Also in our own countries, probably not as much as in the Baltics, but Europe, United States, a number of other places, this has been the key narrative. West is in decline. And by a number of parameters, you would say, okay, there is something into that narrative. Second piece is democracy is weakening. Think of the way the pandemic hit the societies. What did we in fact have within our societies was basically the fragmentation of the opinions. Well, personally, I've never seen such a fragmented Latvian society. We used to have deep divides. Yes, we did. They were the kind of, I wouldn't say ethnic divides, but like pro-Russians and Latvians or Latvian Russians in two camps. There was this those who had means versus those that didn't. But the kind of fragmentation along very, very kind of small circles of opinions has not been there before. And we saw the kind of mess it created in a national discourse during the pandemic. Well, like it or not, but also some of the leaders that have been elected over the past 5-6 years have also raised this question: is where does democracy go to? So that is another big line that was there for Putin, which when he was thinking about, is this a time? And then the last point, I think, what was also clearly one of these elements for the decision for Putin was that West is no more ready for a fight. And there, the conclusion was the kind of massive withdrawal of US from Afghanistan. It didn't really register that much here, but I know for a number of countries that were seeing themselves as the ones that would love to replace West or the world order as it was dominated by the West and first and foremost by United States, they were taking it as a signal. West and United States in particular is not ready to fight. So these were the three parameters which, at least some of them in my view, now we see have been mistaken or were mistaken assumptions, but I would not rule out that some of it will be coming back. So what I submit to you in my analysis, we are in for a time when there is going to be competition / conflict of systems, authoritarian versus democracy. And Russia was, just for a number of reasons, the first one to act upon this conflict line. But when we think about the larger picture, China clearly is there as well. And at least under the current China's leadership and the trajectory China is having, I think they are very much seeing the world in a pretty similar way as Russia did, although probably not having the same pressures to act as Russia did upon the circumstances in Ukraine. So, and also when we think about the way, for instance, these authoritarian systems, let's say Africa is a good example, where we kind of go out with our systems of humanitarian assistance, all kinds of NGOs, a little bit of business, etc. And then a very, very strong Chinese effort in Africa, but very different. Very different. Those of you that have had some relationship with the way China conducts business in Africa, you could see how they act really differently. And now increasingly we've seen our last 5-6 years also Russia going in there with also pretty similar tactics, always looking at coercing the elite of a country, coercing that with the ways and means that would not be fundamentally acceptable in the Western systems. And of course, through creating these leverages and links, trying to create income opportunities. I wouldn't even call them business opportunities because I think the way it functions is really different. But that is, I think, a bit of a where we see how it plays out and pans out in one place particular right now, Africa, which is in a long term pretty significant and important continent also for Europe. So that is the big picture. Now on to the war. Well, the war, as we saw, has been a big miscalculation by Putin, and happily so. So what were the miscalculations that led right now where we are? Russia has been defeated in a battle for Kiev. They regrouped. Now there is a battle for Donbass. They're trying to encircle the Ukrainian forces. And then, of course, some say if they do that, they'll try to look for some exit strategy. But I would side with those that say if they have a decisive victory in Donbass, they would be compelled yet again to attempt to go for Kiev. But there were and there are fundamental problems with Russian assumptions about having this war. First and foremost, this fundamental flawed assumption was that Ukraine doesn't exist as a nation. And I think they've learned by now that it's a big mistake. Second assumption that they've had was that Ukrainian military are very weak, which also was a wrong assumption. Third assumption, they believed these parades that Putin was overseeing, and he thought that they're really as great as it looks in the parades, didn't really figure out that that army was made basically for parades rather than for real wars, and therefore overestimated the Russian capability. And also the fourth assumption that was flawed was that the West is not united. And I would say, of course, we might have questions whether West is united at this point in time because of some countries, But by and large, I think what Russia has seen is a surprised unity. I think that's the way it looks from Moscow. Even countries like Hungary, which have tried to flirt once in a while, basically when the vote comes, they vote with the rest. So from the Russian perspective, these are defeats. Yet, what we have to take away, a major lesson, that, and it's not a new lesson, which has been there around through those who are interested in history, that has been always a common theme, that when the guy or lady is at the top of a power, unchallenged for extended periods of time, the grasp of reality fades. Period. Full stop. And that is what has happened to them. Yet, because what you see right now, what happens in Russia, you don't make career in Kremlin by speaking truth. Because many times truth is really inconvenient. And you increasingly make your career based on talking about the things that the top leader who has been there around for a very long time expects and wants to hear. That's how you make your career. What is the result? The result is he's surrounded by people. Yes, sir. Yes, Vladimir Vladimirovich kind of people. In a way, that's what makes them create mistakes. But the other point we have to take away from that is that we cannot always rationally kind of predict all the moves they're going to make, because we cannot assume that our view of the reality is the same as theirs. And that is something that we have to take away as a lesson. And in some cases it works in our favor, sometimes it's not. And that is something that we have to really kind of pocket for our consideration. Second element, and that is where I'm coming into more of my current kind of position, the importance of information peace in a war. That has been a critical part of the outcomes in the field. You remember, I think it was started in December when the US State Department officials started to talk about the imminent Russian invasion, large invasion into Ukraine. And most people didn't buy into it. Remember this moment when the States Department spokesperson was challenged in a briefing by the Associated Press, a guy saying, well, you're selling me conspiracy theories. But now, on the 24th of February, it was all vindicated. But not only that, we kind of take it for granted that it went the way it went. But the idea is that also we have to take away is that it was an existentially important element for rallying in the first day of war West together. Without that, I don't think that would have happened so quickly. And secondarily, it took away Russian options to foggy the reason for the war. It was crystal clear who is to blame, why, what is happening, and what they're attempting to do. Without that campaign, that might have not happened. And therefore, Russians have lost so far Western information war in the West, and they've lost their war in Ukraine. But what they've still managed to keep is their footing within a Russian language space. And those of you, and I assume there are few of you around that are able to look in the Russian information space, it's really staggering. Staggering how different it is from the real realities on the ground. I always use this parallel that, and I think even there's a joke that somebody should tell Putin that 1984 is a fiction book, not a prescription how to run a country. And I think that is where they are, because like these famous quotes from Orwell's book, like, war is peace. I think that's what is being told there. Evil is good. They've just announced that the 64th Brigade of Russian army, who are most likely responsible for the atrocities in Bucha, are now decorated unit, the guard unit. So evil is good. And basically black is white. And what is troubling is, and I don't buy into these 80+%, because that's where also Kremlin is very interested to show there's a huge support to them. So, and we don't have a way to verify that data independently. But I agree that majority of the Russian population is within that narrative. And I have to also say, and I'm sure you've seen these intercept and phone calls where a daughter talks to a mother, daughter being in Kharkiv in a basement and saying, "Mother, I'm being bombed by the Russians. We are being killed." And mother sitting in St. Petersburg saying, "No, daughter, it's not true. There's very likely these are Ukrainians, or they're dressed like Russians, but they're Ukrainians and are bombing you." And if you think in these terms of, you know, who has the credibility of a message? You know, the strongest credibility typically we have is with the ones that are closest to us. Think if, you know, your daughter talks to you. Well, of course, that's a strong credibility. And the fact that this Russian narrative has been able to override that strong relationship is something that worries me. Because if there is no decisive outcome in Ukraine, where Ukraine wins, the society that is being created right now is not going to disappear. I have to admit, the parallel I want to, and I have to draw, is Hitler's Germany. That's where we historically, and Stalinist Russia also. These are the two parallels we can draw. But unlike in Hitler's Germany, if you don't have a defeat and a reckoning by the society what has been created and committed, and the society is let go and continues, it is going to be extremely dangerous neighbor because of that societal construct, and there's no reason to fool around it. Yet, well, what I can say, for those asking yourself a question, is there going to be a war in the Baltics? There's not going to be a war in the Baltics. Very simple. At least 10 years. At least 10 years. Well, the foresight is always limited. And the reason, in my view, is very simple. Russia does not have a capacity to wage another war. And as long as the sanctions are being held, at least 10 years, they would not have a capacity to challenge the NATO system. Why? Because they've basically burned all of their capacities, are burning right now in Ukraine. And if I look from a pure military perspective, I've always been saying, well, I lived some part of my life in the Soviet time, so I don't believe really that Russian military are so strong, but they surprised me big time. They're really much worse than I thought they are. They, like, just to go through these elements where they're bad at, logistics, like bad. Tactics, sometimes I look at their tactics and the construction of the way they conduct their operation, very similar to the way in 1939 where Polish cavalry rode to attack the German tanks. That's what I feel sometimes when I look how they use these heavy battle groups without air support, without enough infantry, just to be taken out by the modern anti-tank, anti-aircraft weapon systems with a small groups of Ukrainian soldiers. Fundamental element that, like, every modern military has a capacity to have a combined arms warfare. That is where ground, air, and sometimes when necessary, C, act as single. Non-existent. Non-existent. So what we have to take away from that, they militarily will not have a capacity to challenge NATO in Baltics. Full stop. Although, I might say they might have an appetite. That's where I'm not saying, well, they won't. They won't only if they are too afraid to do so, or they recognize that they're too weak to do so. And with the first, we should work. With the second, will be reality for the next 10 years, as long as we keep sanctions going. Yet, of course, that doesn't mean that the element of adventurism that Kremlin has shown, as well as the risk appetite, is going away. And that is where I'm going to kind of address a little bit the question of logic. The more Ukraine wins, the more existential is the situation for Kremlin and Putin, the higher the risks of the very severe rhetoric by Russia, and also namely nuclear rhetoric. So we have to brace ourselves that the more Russia loses, the more they are compelled to talk nuclear. And that's a kind of equation. There's no way around it. Are they ready to use nuclear? I think from a practical perspective, there would be no issues for them to push that button, or for Putin. But of course, I don't think Putin in his, he's not irrational person. He's not grasping the realities, but I would still grant him some rationality. So what also I warn everybody about is that to dissuade Putin from using nuclear weapons, there'll be a rhetoric from the West: if you use, we will use back. And that is going to be a tough moment, because, and you started to see a bit of it already, but you also have to understand the rationale. The best way to make sure that nuclear weapons are not used is to really be very strict on the price that will be put on those that might use that weapon, so that it dissuades them, or you change their risk calculus with that. Because of course, if a nuclear weapon, and in this case we're talking about tactical nuclear weapons clearly, if tactical nuclear weapon is used, it is not in itself an existential. Therefore it's called tactical. It might have a significant impact on a limited area in a battlefield, but it doesn't have this, like, on its own right, the Armageddon that we've read in the books, or some of us have been taught by the Soviet teachers. But the whole premise that hold the world together for 50 years of the Cold War breaks. And this whole premise was why the nuclear weapons were never used. Because the one who is using is risking annihilation. And of course that would mean annihilation for most part of the world. That was the logic that hold the world together for 50 years. If a nuclear weapon is used and there's no huge price, that logic disappears. And then, of course, the consequences of that are multifaceted, and not even now we can kind of count on all of the scenarios, how it might evolve. But first thing that would mean is many countries will rush to create their own nuclear weapon capabilities. And then, of course, imagine instead of like 7 or 8 countries having these, you'd have many more, because technologically it's so much more kind of easy. So it's really a crucial moment in there. So that's another piece. Now, I'm sure there might be some people either directly or linked to the Finland and Sweden Finland and Sweden, in my view, are going to make a decision to join NATO very soon. But also, what does it mean? It means that a Russian rhetoric versus Finland, and if they don't do that together, especially Sweden, will be very, very harsh. And also, I would point out, you remember in the run-up of the war, there were some drones, big drones, hanging over the nuclear sites in Sweden and some critical infrastructure. That was a Russian message. And also that tells me, if we think about the relative safety of the countries around the Baltic Sea region, I'd submit to you that Baltics are in a safer place right now than Sweden is. So if you thought, okay, we're the next, the Baltics, because Zelensky tells so, because some Russian propagandists are saying so, from the actions that I see, it's not quite that. Because nothing of that sort has happened in any of the Baltics. Because that is seen as a big risk to do something versus a NATO country. And that's also the logic I want you to kind of remember. Now the last big takeaway, and then I'll try to kind of wrap up with some bigger things. One thing that I really didn't like about the situation is that Europe has shown incapacity to think strategically, to act strategically, and to do policy strategically. And of course, in a peacetime, you can say, okay, well, world is covered with a pink and rosy clouds, and the sun is shining all the time, and therefore we can think about today and tomorrow. But in a world of conflict, it's not the way you can actually act. And unfortunately, and that's where I'm not talking about the Baltics. I think Baltics have had a foresight, although I would say I would have hoped even more of that. But if I look at Europe as such, as a player on a global space, they've demonstrated lack of strategic, well, they just don't have strategic capacity. Think, act, make policies. And that is where, I submit, through different layers, we have to push Europe to really shift that course. Because and as I've said, I believe there is increased conflicts coming up in next decades, systematic competition and conflict within these systems, having inability to act strategically is a big failure. And it's good that we're partners with US, and at some points they still have this capacity, although they've sometimes been very much inward looking, and we cannot expect always them covering up for us, not only in the Baltics but Europeans. But I think for all the economic might, I think it's very clear that this is a big failure that has to be fixed quickly. And I'm not sure yet most of the Europeans have realized that deficiency. So, wrapping it all together, and then if there are questions. Okay, then a quick wrap up. So, do we worry about the war here? Unless you're worried of Zils and Ladas trying to conquer Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, no. Because that's what's left for them. Is there a chance of lash out by a rocket in any of the Baltics? Yes, but the chance of doing something like that, like big cyber attack, is more on Finland and Sweden rather than in Baltics, in my view, right now. What is there for business to take away? The kind of smooth waters are gone. Geopolitically smooth, calm waters are gone. There are high seas, high waves ahead of us. So, once again, thinking also from a business perspective strategically is important. Creating agilities ability to adapt quickly to the changing circumstances will be, in my view, the essence. And of course, that all adds up. Well, I know I spoke about another of my favorite theme about how the emerging technologies are changing the societies and security and etc. But these things will add volatility to the society, opportunities, but for the society it also will add volatility. And also the competition, especially when we think about China, will be increasingly about first getting edge in the emerging disruptive technologies, and from that edge then challenge the democracy and West. So there's a bit of a different equation than with Russia, because Russia, as we see, we can see that leader thinks in the 19th century's kind of theories, acts in the 20th century warfare, and misses that he is in the 21st century. With China is different. But the idea of challenging the West is going to be the same. So these are, I think, agility, strategic foresight, expecting to have a troubled times are the key takeaways that I would say. Okay, with that.
Thank you. So I would like to, for the questions, I would like to introduce my colleague Andris Grab. He is our Chief Questioning Officer today.
I thought how to call myself. So I'm Slido voice today. So, and this is democracy here. So most voted questions come first, and then we'll see about the timing. So first is there something that would trigger intervention of NATO forces in the war, not just supply of weapons?
Well, it takes 30 to agree upon. So it's hard to understand where at every time will be this. And I have to also admit that I thought that the moment the heavy weaponry will be given to Ukrainians will be the moment there will be a chemical attack. But as we saw in real life, it took atrocities revealed rather than a chemical attack. So it's very situational and depending also on the very much the way people in the NATO countries feel about it, what kind of risks they're ready to take to support Ukraine. And clearly in the Baltics, the people are ready to take bigger risks than, let's say, in Spain and Portugal. But I would not say also that this is the interesting part about this war. It's physically in Ukraine, but I think most of you would say that it's also in our brains, because it is the war that is happening in social media, and Ukrainians, the people, are basically transmitting that word to us. And that is like not only somebody from authority or media just telling to us, but we kind of have this, okay, they're just like me, like, IT guys, head of a company and etc., etc. So we relate with a tragedy, with a suffering. And then the same happens also where the distance is bigger. So that's, I think, a new parameter. The war is being fought also in our heads, and we feel like it. And that also has enabled a bigger response by the West. So if there's a use of tactical weapon, there will be a response. I will not go into what kind.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is regarding coming back to the Baltic businesses. And what would be your view on perspective of the change of Western countries' opinions on the opportunities of making business in the Baltics that are very close to Russia?
Well, it's a hard question. And I know many the further you are, the more it's like, where is that? It's like all single thing and like, let's steer away from it because it's too risky. And that is where I go back to importance of branding the Baltics, branding separate countries. So it's not about the practical realities that make these decisions, because of course once they, okay, I'll want to do the due intelligence and look into the market, then already something has happened. But the key element is before that, and that's where the core is that we need, and in some cases we have, in some cases I think it's doubtful whether we have done enough. We have to have a brand name that clearly distances us from post-Soviet space, post-Soviet. So if we think about somehow really taking it out and lashing at everyone that says post-Soviet country, Lithuania, post-Soviet country, Latvia or Estonia, there is a point in that. That's kind of cognitively making it different. And it's not like, we'll have it like this. But the more we work on that, the better this distance becomes. Is it enough right now? I'm not sure. Basically depends on how much you have already invested in specific areas, how much they recognize you for something different than what Russia is. I think it's glass half full, half empty. It would be my take on it.
Okay, so you mentioned in your presentation China, and there is a question regarding this. So what is the role and possible impact of China in the context of war in Ukraine?
Well, I'd say China is having popcorn out and watching what is happening, and will benefit from both outcomes. If Russia fails, Russia will be so weak that the price for getting access to materials within Russia will be very low, and China will certainly use that as an opportunity. If Russia wins, then that means that West is weak, and China can really spread more aggressively their influence in their own neighborhood. So from both sides, they are having an options. Of course, I think what we can, and also, China has been careful. China has been careful, like supporting Russia. We shouldn't mistake it. They are not supporting. They're supporting, but carefully supporting. And they would want Russia to come out of the top, because that would open the face where China can strive to be the dominant global power with much more aggressive steps. But I don't think it is going to happen, so I would rather see the first scenario as more likely. But of course, it's a bit too early to speak about, for sure.
All right, so the next question is the one that came first in the Slido platform. So how would you advise to source accurate information regarding the war and the related impacts between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, it's hard in the times of war, and I think all of you have felt this. There's like something that shows up, and okay, you think that's what is really happening, and after one day it's being said, well, that's all wrong, has never happened. So first thing I always say, and I think that is also from a business perspective a very important key element for the analytics, is recognize your biases. First and foremost, I always say to my people, you have to know what your bias is. Because when your bias, for instance, my bias is for Ukraine to win, what happens then with the facts is I see something that tells Ukraine just done something that, makes the victory closer. I want to believe it. So my investment in checking of the information will be very limited. If vice versa comes fact that shows that, well, Russia is a step closer to winning, I don't want it to happen. I will be looking at a lot of sources to see that, well, is it really true? But we have to recognize, and especially in the biases where we have that, okay, we want something to be true, that's where we have to double down. And I think it's generic, but also it is specific to this particular situation with the war. Second, don't trust any single source. What I do when I look at the open source, I look at 2, 3, 4 sources for confirming the fact or an event, and not any source, but sources I've seen and followed and deem credible. And only when I see at least 3 of them saying the same thing, I think, okay, that is likely to be possibly factual or close to reality. And ultimately, we always have to accept that there is going to be a fog of war in these kind of situations. And there's another discussion to be held, that how in the modern information environment actually get to the facts, which is getting trickier and trickier. You have to have also some basic, your own analytical understanding and capacity in a specific area. Without that, also, it's very easy to fool people, like saying, I don't know, about tank battles and things, or we've seen movies, we've read books, and therefore we think we were more likely. It's not really like that. You have to have some basic fundamentals. And the key thing that I always say, a good example is that people think in terms of how much power is amassed in an area and etc. But every single military professional will say, it doesn't really matter. What matters is logistics. If you have a tank without a gasoline, without an ammo, it's a piece of metal. And that's where you think, that's where the parallels are. But you have to have an understanding of the situation. So if you want to invest and understand, invest in reading a couple of really authoritative books on the subject.
Okay, and the last question in this Q&A round, regarding what you mentioned, that Putin is surrounded with the persons who are saying, yes, sir. And the question is, why do you think leaders, including business leaders, fall into a trap of surrounding themselves with a yes man or yes sir only?
Well, that's human nature. Actually, it's fascinating to look at a human nature. I because of my work, I follow what the recent research in neuroscience is, and that tries to unwrap how we as humans make decisions. It's really fascinating, and it's actually factually correct. Part of our decisions are being made in our gut. I'm very much dependent of what the gut contents are at a particular moment when we make a decision. And it's a scientific kind of proven element. So we make our decisions based on instincts, based on emotions, and only 20% of the time we make rational decisions. That's how we are. Well, we try to be more rational, and of course, the more rational you are, the more you can climb on the top. You make a better decisions if you can suppress the other elements. We are like that. And of course, if you're at the top of a power, you're becoming narcissist. That's inevitable. Part of them that who are at the top of a power for a long period of time are narcissists. There's a famous saying, well, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So you become thinking of yourself as the only clever, capable person in the room. And like, okay, in 5 years I didn't do that. But then, and there's also the difference between a power and absolute power. And that is where, like, people like Putin is absolute power. They're deciding war or peace. They're deciding death or life. These are kind of basic, fundamental decisions that human can make. And they make it at scale. And therefore, it is inevitable they come to a conclusion that they are superior to others, and therefore their ability to take criticism is diminished, and they are expecting the praise. And also, I'm not sure how much people would say self-understand that, but it has been an inevitable process in these places of power. There's even the kind of a number of analysis of a historic figures having this, absolute power almost, how their effectiveness might have been pretty high in the first years, and then it inevitably wanes, and the longer they are, the lower it goes. So that's, I think, inevitable. And from the board perspective, I suspect that the power is not so big. Risk is there, but it's not so immense. So it's really important to manage it, not to become this, okay, I've seen that, I've known that, so I'm better prepared than others, and I rather listen to myself than anybody else. Because then, of course, the risk is there, but because boards don't have absolute powers. You don't decide typically the life and death. It's a slightly different, more limited power.
Okay, so shall we? Yes, thank you. So thank you, Jānis. What I have learned, two very important things, that we have 10 years. And during these 10 years, we have to make more than 20% of rational decisions. So thank you very much. This is our small present. We want to be very transparent, so okay. It's not money. So it's a very airy, very light, very colorful, and very natural macaroons.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so as I said in the very beginning, that we are in the very changing environment currently, existing and living, and our schedule and our conference is also changing. So I have one not so pleasant news message and another very pleasant message. So I will start from the first one. So I'm sorry to say, but our speakers from Denmark were not able to come today and to meet us in person. And the good news is that to compensate this loss, they are gathering in Copenhagen, not 2, as you saw according to the program, but 4. So you'll get double a result from our colleagues in Copenhagen in Denmark. So now our next topic is about the transformation of supply chains, geopolitical developments and macroeconomic uncertainties. And I would like to introduce Tom Jakobsgaard. He is the founder and CEO of the Board Leadership Society in Denmark, a similar organization. And I would say that they are not dealing with the board leadership improvement in Denmark, but in Europe and even globally. But I think that Tom will introduce himself and the organization he is presenting and his colleague speaker, that they will be here soon on our big screen. So welcome, Tom and Tom.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rytis, and good morning to everybody in the room over there in the Baltic states. We are honored to be part of your annual meeting, and we think it's going to be very interesting to have a dialogue this afternoon with you about how the world looks in the future and how businesses can navigate in the best positive way to take care of the interests of the company and of shareholders and society. And to cover our perspective of those issues, I'm happy to have here. Let's start with Bente Overgaard. And if you put on the slide here, you can see the profile of Bente, who had been working within Boardroom for many years in the financial sector and also in different industries, and actually right now are heading up our programs for the financial board directors we have here, which are compulsory for board directors of financial institutions. And Thomas Arenkiel, who is not only the expert around here, but in Europe, when it comes to risk governance perspective on what's going on, security, politics, etc., and who will set the scene shortly here about how we look at the crisis in Russia, further out, maybe to China and the world as such, and the perspectives on how companies can deal with that. And then we have Tom Behrens-Sørensen, who is the chairman of the Danish Business Society, Danish-Chinese Business Society, who will contribute with perspective from the businesses on how to deal with the challenges short-term and long-term, and in particular with the use to supply chains, where we all today experience issues for the businesses. So thank you for inviting us, and we will encourage you So take up questions. So after each session, we are prepared here to have a dialogue with everybody in the auditorium at your side. Thank you so much. And now I'll hand it over to Thomas.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. What I will do is to give a brief overview of sort of the overall development of geopolitics as I see it. I represent currently a British advisory, macro advisory partners, where we advise global businesses on exactly these geopolitical trends and changes and what they mean for businesses. So I have approximately 10-15 minutes to give you a presentation. So it will be a brief overview, and then if you have questions, of course, I'm happy to answer those. So the overall thesis that we in my company and the advice that we give to our clients at this stage is that the world is increasingly moving towards fragmentation. And we see this in a number of spheres. I will touch in particular on what happens in Russia, the US-China strategic rivalry, the European quest for strategic autonomy, the energy market, and then finally a bit on financial fragmentation. On Russia, I will not go into the depth that you have just been into now, simply to say that what we see is that Russia's disastrous decision to invade Ukraine is actually increasing or accelerating the trend that we have already seen of fragmentation in the world. What we are likely to see even after a cessation of hostilities is that Russia has become an international pariah, and it is highly unlikely that the sanctions against Russia will be lifted, even in the case of a peace agreement. So it's not only now about Russia's invasion in Ukraine, it's about the fact that there is no room to trust Russia and Putin's regime. So we are in for a long-term conflict with Russia that will far exceed the armed conflict in Ukraine. This has, of course, big implications for businesses and the possibility to stay in Russia, the possibility to come back to Russia even after a peace agreement has been entered into. And basically, I think our advice to clients at this stage is that, well, you cannot foresee a future in which you can actually do business in Russia for the next decade or so. This, of course, depends on developments also in Russia, but this is the basic scenario. And this actually accelerates the fragmentation that we have seen, and I'll come back to this. So what is really defining, and this is why with all the disaster and calamity that we see in Ukraine, this is actually in sort of a geopolitical context, this is a bit of a sideshow, in the sense that what is really determining the big picture on geopolitics these years is the geostrategic rivalry between US and China. What we have seen over the last, I would say, 10 years is increased competition between the two countries, a competition that is not only about trade, but is increasingly also about technology, and in reality about who is going to be the dominant economic, political, and military strategic power in the 21st century. And this conflict is now covering still more areas. It started out as a trade dispute with increased sanctions on trade. It has grown into the area of technology. We have seen in particular the discussion and conflict over 5G technology, but this is much more broad than this. It's also about development of artificial intelligence. It's about development of quantum computing, and it's also about the way you handle data. and the free movement of data across the world. This is actually a competition that also then pertains to research and development, R&D, where we increasingly see competition about development of new inventions, technologies that are decisive not only for the economic development of each country, each bloc, but also for military strategic development. And this, I'm afraid, is not going to go away. This is only likely to increase in the future as China develops its dual circulation strategy, and as the US, and I'll come back to Europe as well, increasingly has decided to no longer accept what is perceived as unfair trade conditions in China, but also what is perceived as theft of intellectual property rights, and I would say talent in general. So we are likely to see an increase in the competition in the years to come in all of these areas. And this leads actually, and this is the fragmentation hypothesis, this leads increasingly to different worlds developing when it comes to technology, when it comes to trade in strategic sectors. So I'm not talking about deglobalization as an overall phenomenon. I'm talking about partial deglobalization, where we will increasingly see blocks forming around strategic areas of raw materials, of technologies, trade in certain areas. And this is likely to lead to increased global fragmentation. Turning to Europe, Europe has been seeking to establish European strategic autonomy with the aim to be able to talk both to the US and China at the same time, thus trying to find, I would say, a third way in between those two global powers. This is increasingly coming under pressure, and actually Russia's strategic alignment with China and the Chinese decision to politically support Russia in the conflict in Ukraine is actually accelerating the need for Europeans to take a position and to become much more critical vis-a-vis what is going on in China and the way China is developing its foreign policy. So as we move forward, it will be increasingly difficult for Europe to carve out this third way, and we are likely to see increased alignment between the US and Europe on the big strategic issues. Now, again, this is not to say that we cannot have a well-functioning trade relationship in other areas besides the more strategic areas, that we cannot cooperate on climate issues if there is a will on both sides. For the moment, the Chinese are saying, well, you cannot divide issues like this. You cannot have strategic rivalry on the one hand, competition on the other, and then cooperation on global common problems like poverty, climate change, global taxation, etc. But whether this is going to persist as a Chinese position on this remains to be seen. But again, this is pushing the hypothesis of global fragmentation as Europe increasingly aligns with the US on the big strategic issues. I would also point to energy as a key issue when it comes to global fragmentation. So for a number of years, of course, the ambition to move towards a net zero economy has had, well, I would say, a strong tailwind because of the climate issue and the ambition to fight climate change. Now, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, this has also now had added to it a strategic component, in the sense that moving towards net zero is not now only about the climate issue, it's really about strategic independence of Europe and the US. And here, of course, Europe is in a very vulnerable situation. Thus, we are likely to see Europe trying to move increasingly or to accelerate the green transition. This, however, is very difficult in a time of high and more volatile energy prices, and in a time where energy security is the most important issue for Europe in the short run, with increased investments in LNG, in infrastructure, that all pertains to the fossil fuel economy. So what we are likely to see over the next decade is actually the geopolitics of the old fossil fuel economy has a new element added to it, a new layer added to it, and that is the geopolitics of energy transition. Because if you want to transition to a net zero economy, you need other supplies of raw materials, and there are other minerals that are becoming increasingly strategic. So the supply chain on these all of these raw materials is becoming an increasing strategic issue as well. So energy transition is actually adding to fragmentation also, in the sense that once you get to a net zero economy, you actually decrease some of the dependencies that you have today. For example, you're no longer dependent on Russian oil. You will to be a smaller extent be dependent on oil and gas from the Middle East. Not completely independent, but more independent. This actually adds to global fragmentation as well. My final point is financial fragmentation. As we have seen devastating sanctions on the Russian economy developing, this has now included also sanctions against holdings of the Russian central bank in Western central banks. So the Russian currency reserves, strategic currency reserves built up since 2014, have to a large extent been frozen in the West, up to 2/3 of the currency reserves. Now, this is not, of course, only a problem to Russia. This is also being looked at very seriously in other countries like China, India, Saudi Arabia, and even other economies. And as we develop, we are likely to see competing attempts to develop alternatives to the dollar as the key international currency reserve. Now, this will be extremely difficult because of the depth of the US economy, the depth of the US financial market. It's not easy to come up with an alternative, but we are likely to see attempts at just that as we move forward. And this will, of course, add very much so to global fragmentation. So, concluding, there are a number of key issues that lead me to the conclusion that we are likely, as we move forward, to see increased global fragmentation. This can take the form of blocks forming, and increasingly then blocks around the US and China. We can also see another scenario in which it's not so much blocks, but I would say various asymmetric alliances developing according to the issue. But it all leads to increased fragmentation and increased deglobalization, thus reversing the trend that we have seen developing over the last 30 years, turning into increased focus on strategic issues, increased focus on solidifying your supply chains, increased global competition and strategic rivalry. I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Tom, how would businesses deal with that? I mean, for years now, for decades, we have been transition businesses into globally businesses. And now we have to relate to, as it looked, a new world.
Great question. I wish I had more than 20 minutes, Tom. First of all, very, very pleased to be here. Would love to have been able to join you in Vilnius. I had the pleasure of hosting a Latvian government delegation in China when I was still living there some years back. Was very pleased to deal with you back then. I'd like to start off just a few reflections on the fact that at our events in the Danish Board Society, we've really been focusing on 4 mega trends. We've been focusing on climate change, digital transformation, and deglobalization, as well as demographics. And today, it's very clear that deglobalization has taken on added significance, as Thomas has alluded to, and accelerated by the Russian invasion into Ukraine. I'll try and cover as sub-themes here First and foremost, China, because China plays a key role in deglobalization, given its size, given its importance and its global ambitions. I'll try and cover briefly the supply chain issues. I might add here, I had 30 years with the Maersk. I continue to be very much involved in the global maritime and logistics industry. And rounding off, I'd like to share a few recommendations with you from some of the companies I'm associated with and some of the experiences we have there. I think, first of all, when it comes to board responsibilities, we normally talk about the 4 S's, Tom. So, shareholder, stakeholder interest, first of all. We talk about strategy. We talk about, obviously, the team, making sure we have an A team. We talk about governance, including particular risk management. And this is taken on added complexity, given what has happened. I think some of the key questions we need to ask ourselves in businesses is, first and foremost, given increased complexity and turbulence, how do we become better at predicting the future? Question mark. Another question that begs, I think, is how resilient are the decisions that we make? And the third question I would ask is, how adaptable are you at coping with turbulence, competing on scale and speed? And by the way, I think there's a lot we can learn from Chinese companies in all that. So these are sort of my opening comments. I'd like to turn to China, because I think reflecting on what Thomas also said, it's very important to understand, where China is heading and what is driving China's direction. What are the Chinese Communist Party? What are their long-term aspirations? It's first and foremost for CCP to continue to be the leading authority. They're very long-term in thinking. Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, with the Politburo, have been out with very clear-cut goals for both what they call the medium term here is 2035, realized socialist modernization. What does that mean? It means that they are intent on trying to double GDP per capita between 2021 and 2035. That translates into growing 4.7% annual GDP growth over the next 15 years. That is a phenomenal, very, very ambitious task. I actually think personally that they are well on track to be able to achieve it. I'll come back to that point there. Further out, 2049, it is to reach great power status. This is not about a multipolar world, the way that Xi Jinping talked about at Davos. They are more ambitious than that. And they really have seen the weakness of USA, folding out during the global financial crisis, and they feel that this is our time. So they want to be a global leader in terms of what they call composite strength, building a modern socialist country that is prosperous, strong, democratic, culturally advanced, and harmonious, quote unquote, from their bulletins. If you want to sort of get a feel for where are they heading, there's some great indicators in what is called the 5-year plan. They make these 5-year plans that really map out the institutionalized way of thinking, putting long-term markers down in terms of strategic goals. And there are a couple of new things in the 14th 5-year plan that was launched last year, namely decoupling. Decoupling didn't start with COVID. Decoupling started actually with Xi Jinping coming into power all the way back in 2012. He didn't show his true intentions during the first 5-year plan, but it really started, materializing during the 13th 5-year plan, and it's moved further up the radar, combined with what they now call dual circulation. Dual circulation is about really leveraging their size, the domestic market, to become also a global leader in many industries, and Thomas alluded to some of them. Thankfully, there are in that 14th 5-year plan a number of areas where they depend upon the rest of the world, and we depend upon China. Thomas alluded to it. I mean, first and foremost, the green transition. The global climate challenge that we all have is a global undertaking. And I think, reflecting on what you said, Thomas, that China will have to come around accepting that if we are to solve this, we have to work together. And actually, Denmark has a lot to offer in that context when it comes to contributing. I don't think we are good enough for that today, but that's a different chapter. A lot of focus also on innovation. I think it's interesting. Many people still look upon China, as a copycat. Reality is that last year, Chinese companies filed twice the number of global patents compared to USA. That was number 2. So China really, progressing very, very fast down that line of innovation. Now, future scenarios, where is China heading in terms of decoupling? I normally use the traffic light, green being reintegration. China, comes back into the Western fold. They want to play by Western standards, by our rules. This is not going to happen. Under Xi Jinping, they left that course back in 2012. We are right now in what I call the yellow traffic line. So we are at persistent friction, but where pragmatism still prevails, and Western companies, be it American or European, can still play both sides, but it's getting increasingly complicated. I think the Russian invasion into Ukraine has added a lot of complexity. Now, I see China's way of positioning as being crucial for how the relationship between China and the Western world will play out. There are really 4 scenarios. One, the real good one is that they sort of prompted by what's happening will take the Western side. It ain't gonna happen. The other extreme is that they go down very hard, double down on their alliance with Russia. They're prepared to break Western sanctions. I don't think that's going to happen either. Then there are 2 muddy scenarios in the middle in terms of how they try to position themselves. A bad one is that they will sleepwalk into Western sanctions, where Chinese companies, SOEs and what have you, will find themselves on the wrong side of sanctions. And that will have profound ramifications where I think we as Western companies need to think in terms of scenario building. How will we navigate in that mess there? And then there's a better middle road here where, what happens in terms of breaking sanctions will be minuscule. It's not something that requires the Western world to really come down hard. So I think these are the key points here. But if I was to sum up on China, China, has made the decision to pursue their own course. They want to become, a global leader in terms of political, military might, economic might as well. And I think what is often overlooked when we talk China is that if I put on my cap as chairman of BCBF, I can see that the decoupling that is taking place, having different answers from Western companies depending on your size and the importance of China. I see big Danish companies, typically those in C25 index, that are doubling down on China, but they also taking stock of what is happening and saying, we need to become much better at scenario building, risk managing. What are those risks here? It becomes a China for China. The 4 Ds we normally say. So design in China, decide in China. It becomes, very much digitalization on Chinese terms. But a doubling down, if I look at, the big Danish companies, Maersk just made the biggest acquisition of any Danish company in China, buying into Li & Fung, 24 billion Danish kroner, 3 billion euro is happening. Novo Nordisk, Danfoss, Grundfos, etc. China is a top 3 markets. And these companies are there to stay. I think an opportunity for them is to actually also think working with China outside China, because China is weak outside. If you take a Maersk, my old company where I was, where I worked 30 years, when I was regional chairman executive for Maersk in China, I took the Chinese companies outside, brought them into Africa, brought them into Europe in joint investments. In return, we got something in China. And that really was a great quid pro quo. And I still think there are opportunities in that space, in Africa, elsewhere, where we can try and level the playing field a lot better. So that's just one thought here. I see, reflecting also on DCBF, I see our smaller companies, many of them realizing we don't have the bandwidth to cope with a China that goes its own way, pursues own standards, own policies and what have you. They simply can't cope. I'm also a business angel. I have made the recommendation to one of my Danish scale-ups to leave China because we realize we simply can't compete being up against large Chinese SOEs that don't always respect, Western IPR and what have you. So I think these are my key points about China. If I was to make a bet here, I really think that while there'll be bumps on the road, Xi Jinping will get re-elected come the 20th Party Congress. He will sit firmly in the saddle. There will be bumps on the road until then, but I think, China is well placed. They kept a lot of their gunpowder dry during the recent years when Western governments resorted to quantitative easing on a big scale. Finally, a point to Lithuania. I think a very bold decision by the Lithuanian government to recognize, let's say, Taiwan indirectly. It hurts me, it pains me to see the way that you're being penalized. And I think it's great to see that EU is standing up for Lithuania. We brought that case to WTO. If I was to supplement you, Thomas, on the Sino-EU relationship, I would say it is an all-time low right now. First of all, I would also say that sadly, EU is divided when it comes to China. We've got a number of European states, Hungary, case in point, Greece to some extent, Portugal to some extent, that are very, very dependent upon Chinese investments in infrastructure and what have you. And I would love to see a EU being much more united. And I think we're slowly getting towards that, prompted also by the Russian invasion into Ukraine. I don't think we are using the gunpowder that is available to us in the dialogue with China. When you look at our sheer trade numbers, we could sell a lot more to China. When you look at reciprocity and the way that we are able to give tit for tat with China, we don't use that well enough. So I do think that we have cards we haven't played well, and we need to become better at aligning interests within EU and playing those cards in a much stronger manner. I want to move on to supply chain. Yeah. First of all, reflecting on where we are right now.
Before that, Tom, maybe Thomas, any comment to what Tom has been saying here?
No, I think it's a very strong, very pertinent, and very good analysis. I think moving forward on China, I think we have to think in scenarios. Actually, I think the likely scenario is the one that we have sketched out. But there are a couple of alternatives that we also need to look at. I mentioned, China returning. I don't see that either. But there's also a scenario where things actually get much worse. And we are, of course, all thinking about Taiwan and the risk that. Okay, yeah. I think there's someone on the line here. So if President Xi has made it his ambition to reunite China, and that means to get Taiwan into the fold before the end of his term. That is quite clear. The question is, of course, with which means are we going to see this? And of course, here there is an obvious parallel to what Russia is trying to do in Ukraine. And should the Chinese decide to move on this, this would be, I would say, a shift in paradigm with regard to Western companies' opportunities and the opposite actually in China. So I think in the scenario planning that the companies have, they need to include this scenario, which would make it extremely difficult for them to continue to do business in China. And the consequence of this is tenfold, or if not 15-fold, of what we have seen with regard to Western opportunities in Russia.
Yeah, and turning that into a boardroom challenge, I mean, we learned from the pandemic that we were not good enough in having scenarios and to be agile or resilient in how we would deal with those kind of developments. Now we've seen the same in Russia. I don't think companies should get into that problem again. So scenario planning and both scenarios also need to get into the boardroom, and maybe also for the supply chains.
Maybe also.
I mean, we just see prices going up everywhere because of imbalance in the supply chain system, and it seems to just get worse.
If I may speak to that, I started in my boardroom, so to speak, companies I'm associated with, 18 months back to flag inflation and say this is here to stay. What I saw, because I still have a lot to do with China, I saw producer prices in China all of a sudden going through the roof. That happened around autumn 2020 already. And when I saw that, and when I talked to a lot of my Chinese friends, China has really been the dam, that held back global inflation. And when that dam broke, and frankly, Chinese government couldn't give a damn about the rest of the world as long as their own economy does well. That for me was a yellow flag. So I think coming back to scenario, which are the key indicators you should be looking at? Incidentally, I was in China in January of 2020 on one of my regular business visits. I lived in China through Sārts. And, I was in Singapore in February of 2020. I saw the way that the Singapore government reacted to this. And I saw how the Chinese government reacted, although not in the open. And I said in my own boardrooms, this could become, a global thing. So again, a global outlook, global perspectives, knowing what you should look for is obviously critical in that respect. Supply chain briefly, I think reflecting on where we are right now, we've been through what is both a supply and a demand crisis. Reverse order, so to speak, which is without parallel in history. Speaking briefly to the sort of supply chain part of it, if I look, for instance, at the maritime field that has created havoc, the container industry, for example, the container shipping companies, it takes additional 12 days for container shipping companies to turn their equipment around. There are 4,000 bulk ships right now waiting outside ports. So in reality, the capacity is there. But COVID, has been a spanner in the wheel on a scale, that has meant that some of the companies that I represent have not been able to get goods back to Europe or to USA, what have you, from Asia fast enough. So we're dealing here with a supply and demand driven crisis at the same time. Addressing one of the companies that I'm associated with, we control the entire value chain, straight from sourcing the products. We have our own tanneries, we have our own factories manufacturing shoes. What are we seeing there? We have seen labor shortages, first of all, foremost, on a scale that we would never have imagined. Even blue-collar workers, be it in China, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, and here in Europe for that matter. And I think, demographics are such that those labor shortages are not going to go away. So the answer here is obviously, higher productivity. It's about automating and what have you. Components, we've seen, major bottlenecks in sourcing components, etc. So a host of challenges.
We only have 2 minutes more. I don't know, Rytis, if you have any questions there at this point. But Tom, this development of supply chain, don't you see that as adding to deglobalization? Because to build resilience anyway would take that you redraw production, whatever, to your own kind of neighborhood.
I see very much, as Tom suggested here, deglobalization, decoupling continuing as a result of supply chain issues. And some of them, are not going to go away. How are we dealing with this? Some of the companies where I'm involved in, I think, we are assessing supply chain exposure. in a much more meticulous manner. We are identifying, alternative sources of inputs, alternative sources of transportation, etc., and we're trying to enhance end-to-end supply chain visibility also, and we're really trying to create much more resilience through strategic redundancy and what I also call reduced geographic and risk exposure. And back to your point, including nearshoring, bringing production back to Europe as part and parcel of that. If I may round off and really reflecting on your point, Tom, is really about how do boards deal with this? I think there's too much focus that is backward on boards, first and foremost. I think we need to revisit the board wheel, need to become more forward-looking. I think be more demanding in terms of reporting and what you focus on. Assigned to committees, I've seen when I was on the board of NOL in Singapore, a large Temasek-owned company, our risk management committee, I think did a terrific job under a very able chairman, the former CEO of Microsoft, in really looking at scenario planning and how do you sort of take the work out of the main boardroom and bring it back in, with a much more, let's say, granular risk matrix. I think as well also advisory boards can be very, very helpful if you want to understand, geographies that are difficult to understand. I've seen that work very well as well.
But that's a challenge. I mean, how boards view the future, and as you say, maybe too little, and maybe too wishful thinking it can end up being. And therefore, we have to work much more with scenarios, also the ones we don't like actually to face. And that's where Thomas and his company also comes into play. So we need to shake up the boardrooms and get away from too much of wishful thinking. Which is, I don't know, I think we stop now. Any questions or at this point, or you want to move on in the agenda?
Yes, so thank you all of them, all of you, and for a really very kind of wide view on the situation and the outcomes and all your recommendations. I think that we got some questions because we are using this Slido platform. We got some questions, but we are out of time, and I believe that we will see you or part of you right after 1 hour. And then at the end of our conference, we are having traditional interactive discussion when we are asking the rest of the questions we received during the event. So then we will be able to place these questions to you, and then we will get probably your answer. So is it okay?
Yeah, I think it's okay. But will you help me give Thomas Arenkiel a hand, because he got to advise more companies around here on how to deal with the geopolitics of today. So thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We will turn off the mic here so we don't disturb you until we are ready again.
Okay, so see you in an hour. Thank you. Thank you once again. And now we have a break of half an hour, and we will continue to 1 hour 30 sharp. So enjoy your coffee break. Our coffee break and networking part finished. And now we will talk from the very, very practical perspective about the specific company, about the specific board, and about, of course, the specific situation. So the topic is the board role and actions during industry crisis, from pandemics and to utilities. And I would like to invite on the stage Vidmantas Šiugždinis. He is a very experienced top manager and very experienced board member, both in state-owned enterprises and the privately owned companies. So welcome, Vidmantas.
So hi everyone, my name is Vidmantas, and I'm active board member in a couple of companies and in the association of the fitness clubs. But today I will share my experience in my role in Impulse and Lemon Gym, where I was working as a CEO for 9 years, and then stepped to the board and experienced few really significant crises to the industry, the largest of which is the pandemics, and recently happening utility crisis also will affect our company for a few upcoming years. So I will share some stories how we were facing the situation and what steps we were taking as a board. And I believe that any crisis that is happening in any company should start with estimation of the crisis. So when the pandemic hit and the clubs were closed in just a few days announcement, so the first thing that we started to do as a board was to try to estimate how long will it be affecting our business and what estimate effect it will have in euros. So of course it's all assumptions, but we ended up with some amount, the figure that we needed to achieve in the upcoming 2 years, which we thought that 2 years the pandemics will impact our industry, the fitness industry of brick and mortar, let's say the fitness clubs. And these 2 years we have to survive, having in mind that our business is very much fixed costs. So in fitness clubs you pay rent, you pay utilities, you pay salaries, and it does not differ a lot from the amount of people who come to the clubs. So just a little bit of the utilities on the water is saved. Otherwise, it's just fixed cost. So when we estimated what actions we can do ourselves, so for example, we can optimize our structure, we can optimize our staff, and of course, while the clubs will be shut, so the utilities we will not be paying for those, or only a minimal. But then we understood how much money we need to collect from outside in general. And I don't mean financing, I mean how much saving from outside costs, which is basically the rent, we need to do in the upcoming 2 years. So, we came with the estimate that we need to save on rent 2.5 million euros. And this was very important for us to have exact amount, because then we could go to the landlords and show them very openly the books. We show the industry how we estimate it will change in the upcoming couple of years. And then having in mind our long-term relationship with the landlords, we need to get this huge discount to be able to survive and to prolong our obligations further on. So, for example, if we want to continue our operations and pay rent for 10 years, we need to have a big discount for 2 years. And this estimation of goal was, we needed to do it very fast. It took us up to 2 weeks. So of estimations, calculations, and then saying, okay, how many closures there could be in the upcoming 2 years. We have a very cyclical business, like seasonal one. So for example, if we are closed in spring, we understand that we will not do sales in spring. So all summer we will have low income. And then if we will be closed in autumn, we will have not income for one more season. So that's how we calculated. And after we did the calculations, we made it even more conservative, and it appeared like approximately right. We said that in 2022, in the end of 2022, so 1.5 years later, we will recover, and it seems like we will recover to the previous numbers in the end of this year. So having in mind this goal, it's makes much more clearer for the team what we need to do, how much we need to achieve, how much and what we can offer to the partners, suppliers, the team, and so on. So what game we are playing. For example, now with the utilities, we estimate that within 3 years period, we will spend 4 million euros more on utilities than previous years, for example, comparing to 2009. So that's the estimate of 4 million euros, like how much then we can invest to put this amount down, how much we can give to the motivation to the people who will work on this, and what new technologies we can implement, but very clear specific goal and amount of money, like what we need to achieve within this crisis. For example, if someone is now shutting the business in separate country, how much will that cost? How long will it take? So I believe that is one of the first and most important things to do. Another, of course, is the plan. It's if in the goal setting, the board, I believe, it makes a very important role in the plan. It is the management who prepares specific actions how to achieve this. For example, if we understand that we need to get 2.5 million euros discount for a rent for 2 years, which is like never happened, why landlords should give it in general? They can say, sorry, no. But if we need to achieve this, how we will act? So one thing is to present the numbers like they would understand, to be very open about the business. Another thing, to make it convincible, supported with the data. Why? Maybe to agree on some possible scenarios, like if the market will recover faster, we will pay you the previous rent. If it will be even more down, for example, we will stay closed for longer period, so then we will not pay at all for that time. So try to make the plan which would be adjustable to the situation. But I think that what helped us the most is to being open and clear in communication with the partners. So if you don't have money to pay, you're saying like, I don't have money to pay, but you're not taking the phone. It's the worst thing that you could do. So I think that being open and clear, transparent was the important part of this plan, action plan. But what we did then, when we did the goal, what we need to save, and the plan, how we would achieve it. So then we made the workshop with the board and the management, what would happen in like 5 years' time. Okay, we will, in 2 years' time, we will save this money, we will achieve this goal, we will survive the crisis. But what then? Impulse and Lemon Jim Group belong to the private equity fund Baltic. So they will still gonna exit at some point. What we will sell? What investors will be looking to buy? So how we should change the business, because it's like, how to call it, it's a good situation to do big changes. So how we will change the business that it would be more attractive to investors after these 3 years after pandemics. You know, so 2 years pandemic, 3 years after, we will be able to sell. So what they will buy? So how we should change our business model and our concept of the club that it would be attractive. Then we didn't yet think about the utility crisis, but we already thought that, for example, looking long-term, there will be municipalities and public sector investing in the swimming pools. So we said probably there will be long-term much higher competition in the swimming pool sector. So we should be exiting swimming pools and make clubs with only dry zone, how to call. So then it is much easier to do some decisions now. For example, if you are going to the landlords regarding the rent, and you know that you're not gonna need so many swimming pools in 5 years' time, so that's also the part where you can negotiate and say, okay, I can lose some part of the space, and you can do something else there. Or I don't need it at all after 2 years. And this reason actually helped, this move helped us a bit with the utilities. Like this decision that we don't need some swimming pools in the future, it helped us to save on the costs in the current situation, but also it helps, or it should help us to prepare the business for exit in some time. So this long-term vision and comparing this short-term plan with the long-term vision, it was really a very important part, and board was the initiator of that and participator in this situational assessment from the future point of view, from the investors' point of view. They are seeing many investors, and they know what they are looking for in the acquisition. So I think this was the most critical part of the participation of the board. Then the team who will work to achieve it. At that moment, in the end of 2019, I was already stepping down as the CEO of the group. I transited to the board and started to take care about the new developments of the company. And our CFO took over the position of the group CEO. So then we sat together and we talked it through. Like, we cannot, he was not able to go through this situation. He said, I can be a CFO, I can work with the sales or some other data, but I would not like to deal with the people, which will be like really significant part of the work as a CEO. So I had to come back to the CEO position and work for 1.5 more years just to cover that. So one thing is like from the top management perspective, another from the team perspective. If you understand that you have to lose, for example, 20 to 30% of people in your team, so who will stay? Who will be the ones to do this super hard work, which will take year and a half? You don't know how it will end. Hopefully, you will come out of the crisis even stronger than you were, but you may not survive this. So one thing that I can recommend, that it's probably important that people who stay, they should trust each other a lot, and they should be really close to each other to support the whole idea and the whole team with this mission, like not to only survive, but to become better. And in that process, we had to change the team. Like, there were some really good people on the team which we had to lose because they were too like egoistic or competitive inside the company. They were like, it could be like a great head of department, but if he's gonna like compete with the other head of departments during such time, no, it's not. In the war, you cannot fight against each other. You don't have time. You have to concentrate with the enemy. So I think this support and like really strong bond in the team was one of the important criteria that we had to evaluate. And understand that this will be a small team, but they will be fight with each other as long as it's needed. The motivation part, it's also important when you go into this difficult situation. You have to promise something, like why we are doing this, why I am doing this as a person. So this small team, why are you gonna fight this war, and what will be in the end when we will win? So it depends on some very practical questions, like what will be the motivation of top management? In the end of this process, we ended up with one more shareholder of the company. Like we gave the option for the one person from the top management, like, okay, if you survive and make this company better and more valuable, it will be great. If we will lose, if we will not be able to do it, so that was the stakes. So even having in mind that some part of the top management team could need to go down with their salaries for some short term, but then like you can earn more if you will prevail. So I think this motivation part consists of two questions, like very practical. There will be less people, but they need to earn, and maybe you cannot pay them now, but you can pay them more in the end if you will achieve the result. The other part is this inside motivation, like this big purpose you are fighting for. Like why we are doing this, why fitness clubs are needed in general, Like we are doing some very important part of the mission for the society, make the healthier nation. And if you feel like it's important for you, okay, let's go into this war, because you know why you are doing it. Otherwise, there will be so many tough times. Like, and then if you will be asking yourself why and saying like, I don't really get, I don't get paid enough, and I work too hard, so you will not survive. Like, it's too many different things to consider, like to be doubtful about yourself. The communication, it cannot be, cannot be over communicated, and it comes to different parts of communication, from the board to the top management, from the top management to the team. We were doing calls. Then with the board, we started doing daily short calls, 15 minutes calls in the morning. Did it for 2 weeks, then we did it twice a week, then we did it once a week, and then we considered, we continued for once a week call for quite long, for half a year. And then we switched to 2 calls a month. So with a team, it's also like lots of communication with the whole company, like why you're doing this, why you are reducing your staff, why you are letting these people go, and what you are trying to achieve. Like then we had so many different activities within the company, like with the people, to involve them to participate, because everybody is anxious, everybody is afraid, they don't know how it will end. Will I have the work at the end of the month? Will I have the work when the clubs will open? Nobody knows, and you cannot even offer that for now. But the strangest thing that I did, that at that time I was reading bedtime stories for my younger daughter, and for 2 weeks I said that anybody can connect via phone to listen to the bedtime stories. And there were people connecting and listening to the short story up to 10 minutes, and that's it, like just hello, good evening, the story, and good night. So, and it was really strange thing to do for me, and I didn't feel like in my comfort zone, but there were people connecting, and really they needed some kind of making them calm, a bit of hypnotization, and then like it's just one day passed, then you go to another day. Of course, these work schedules require lots of discipline. So I believe that it's also connected with part of communication, but also the processes. So probably like the more written and agreed process it is, the more communicated it is across the company, so the better. But the top management should be disciplined as in the best army in the world, because otherwise they cannot show the same for the company. So I would say discipline in every move that you agree to do. So we also divided the roles in the board, like who is taking care of the digital content promotion, who will take care more role with the management, talking about people, who will talk more about the refinancing, looking into the future, because we started the refinancing process before the pandemics a month, and we ended up 1 month after pandemics. So right after we ended up the pandemics, we got the finance, and which is like also difficult to expect. But during the pandemics, we made some moves that proved to the financing company that we are a good company to invest in long term. Then not many leaders talk about personal strength, but I believe that it's one of the most important things when you're going through difficult times. Like you should be strong with your mind and body yourself. Like everybody of us have got our internal disciplines, how we deal with that with daily. But I was going into such a deep routine myself, like from 5:30 meditation, exercise, a bit of the reading or journaling, then in the middle of the day walking the dog, and then making the phone calls, and in the evening walking the longer walk with the dog, and then listening to some podcast. And it's like this routine helps you also be strong mentally and physically. And we tried also to implement the same within the team. So how many weekly exercises you do as a company, how you help with the mental health of the team, and do you have some webinars or psychologists present? So people will be going through very difficult times. So you as a leader, of course, like in the plane crash, you have to take care of yourself first and then take care of the others. But I believe that I think leaders should talk more about this, how they survive themselves, because they are going through difficult stress. So I would advise really mental health and physical health take as a priority. And the improvement and what lessons we should, we have seen what we have done wrong, for example. So I understand from today's perspective that what we have done so good with the team here in Lithuania, I think we haven't been so good in other countries. We have business across the Baltics, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. So the more far is the business, so a bit similar as with the development of the new business. So in the crisis situation also, I think it requires more of your attention. Like the Latvian and Estonian business, we expected that local leaders will take part and they will emerge and they will do the same as we do, just looking at our example. But it's difficult, and it's difficult to predict that it would happen. And I would say now I would pay more attention to the international business as well, participate there personally more, and because the farther the distance, the worse the impact, the energy, and so on. So you have to create this energy somehow in these faraway local leaders, that they would do the same what we have done here locally. And probably one more important lesson that we took, that some of the things you can do in advance. I remember now it is a bit strange even to talk that after 2014-15 events in Ukraine, there was a topic in our agenda, in our management agenda. We said, what worse could now happen for our business externally? And then there was a saying, full-scale war in Ukraine. Because then we understood people will not buy long-term memberships, and they will really not be considered about exercising. There will be many other questions in their mind. And then we said, let's do the workshop and say what we will do if the full-scale war in Ukraine will happen. And we did a half-day workshop. We listed 20 initiatives, what we could do if the war would be announced. And then we said, what if we would implement some of them now, without the war happening? And we did. And some of them were connected with automatization, because we thought that maybe it would be difficult to find people. And some of them were connected with the saving costs, because then you don't have money to pay for the cost. And in general, I think that lots of the businesses could do that in advance, like say, what worse could happen? These, Black Swans are coming one after another. So what could be next worse for your business? And of course, it's difficult to imagine something that never happened, like pandemics. So we didn't think of that. But the international crisis not so far away, what could affect our economical stability, we knew that. Though we didn't thought, for example, of now, it's like obvious, the utility prices could go up, a few times. What would happen? So with the utilities also, we calculated now 4 million euros in 3 years. It's significant. Could we foreseen it? Of course. Could we take action before a few years? Of course we could. But you don't think about these things in advance. But now I think it's one of the bigger lessons that I could take. Try to estimate things in advance and try to take the topics that are very comfortable for you. The utilities were very low in the last 3 days before pandemics, in the last 3 years. So they were higher from 2012 to 2016, then they dropped, and then we were enjoying this comfortable situation. But of course we were supposed to do this, so that's the lesson learned. And in the result, as I said, like a few weeks after pandemics ended, when we opened the clubs, we assigned the financing of 12.5 million euros. We issued the bonds, which was bought by the Polish debt fund. And in the end of the pandemics, like when I say end of pandemics, opening, when we could operate. So we had more money in our bank account than we were before the pandemics. Our company was much more leaner. Our processes were more automatized. We had rent discounts a year in advance, and that helped us to take the burden of this few million euros just written off because we were not working. So we managed in the first year, before the pandemics, we had 2.8 billion euro EBITDA per year. The first year we had 2.3. Our sales dropped 5 millions. Our EBITDA dropped 500,000. Well, in general, we are fixed cost business, as I said, so it's all connected. But this thinking like that we have to do so much more than we understand now it's needed, and we did it in advance, it helped. Because the next year was the more difficult. The first year was, we did even more than we needed, but the next year ate this money. And so as I tried to mention during the presentation, I would say like the board's role, the most important part is the setting the goal, then having the long-term vision and agreeing with the management how this short-term plan surviving will fit the long-term vision, and maybe you have to adapt, and then improvement during the journey. So someone should watch from aside and understand what can be improved, because everybody is working so hard that it's difficult even to understand where you can do even better. I think, no, I'm doing like everything that I can, but maybe you can do it differently. And this guy is Eddie Edwards. Maybe you know him from the movie Eddie the Eagle, about the guy who have been the jumper in the Olympics, 1988 in Calgary. So he's British. He was never doing ski jumping before, but he said like, I want to get to Olympics. He was just a downhill skier. Okay, downhill skier, but he never jumped. And he said, I want to be in Olympics, but I will never get to Olympics as a skier. There are so many better ones. So he's from Britain. So what Britain doesn't have? They don't have ski jumpers. So I can be in the Olympics as the only British ski jumper. So, and he had very limited time to learn ski jump, and everybody's saying like he's stupid and he will, the worst thing that could happen, he could break himself like in parts, because it's a big, this jumping hill. But he, and I talked to him, and he said like, you know what's strange? I always believed that I will do it. And when you believe that you will do it, so then only afterwards, when he made the 71-meter jump, which became #1 in Britain, and it was British record for years. So everybody's saying he did the impossible. It's the same with the big crisis. Like if you cannot do it, there will be someone else who will come and do it instead of you. So just believe in that, and then everything is impossible until it's done. So thanks.
Thank you, Vidmantas. Actually, I was promising to you that it will be a very practical speech and the presentation and sharing the very practical insights, but I think it was much more inspirational speech. So I believe that everyone agree with me.
Yeah, I thought it should be a bit more motivational than showing just some sheets and data, but.
Yes, and what I learned, that it's very important, you know, I remember back in 2008 and 10 when the financial crisis was kind of everywhere. So I saw some of the top leaders of the companies in a very big, sorry to say, means that they were very good in the good times, but when the bad times came, and it appeared that it was just an imagination that they are good. But this example, I think, shows that that you have to be prepared, and you have to work hard, and to show yourself as an example for all your team and the company. So we had some questions, but you already answered your questions during your presentation. So thanks once again, and we will see you in our interactive discussion. Okay, thank you. Okay, so now we are flying back to Denmark. Is Denmark with us, Copenhagen?
No.
Yes, now we hear you. Excellent.
Hi, good to see you again.
Yeah, so you know, it's a long distance from Copenhagen to Vilnius. The voice is going very, very slowly, you know. Okay, so now we are continuing, and we are going to discuss the value creation in the area of climate change and sustainable development goals. And once again, you present who are in your studio.
Yeah, right now we are Bente, Overgaard, and myself here. And as I mentioned earlier on, yeah, Bente, maybe you say a few words about yourself.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us. It's very great pleasure to be around here. I have a background for many years within finance and work as a board professional now and heading the financial board education here in Copenhagen Business School Board Education.
Yeah, and the slide you can see right now, that's to give you some background. We are actually right now at Copenhagen Business School. We are in the building where we have 4 stores with classrooms and breakout rooms and Zoom installed in all the classrooms where we are running our board education programs. And you can see there that we actually have 1,000 board directors on training every year at an average of 6 days. And you can also see that we have 140 days of board training here. And you can see how many members we are at the Board Leadership Society. And you can see the Copenhagen Business School having 21,000 students, and of them are 4,000 international students. That was just to set the scene. That's where we are right now, Bente and I. And now we will be talking about the topic here about value creation. How do boards work with value creation in the area of climate change and sustainable development goals? And the slide here is to say, we have this show me the money or show me a better world. And how do boards kind of balance these two overall demands for what companies should be doing today? And where do those demands or signals or wishes come from? And I think it's very important that corporation and boardrooms understand the total context of where they are operating.
Yes, it is.
And here you can see, sitting in the boardroom, there are many places to look, Bente.
You have a very, very huge variety of agendas on the board. Every meeting you need to focus on what creates the value with what we are occupied with at board meetings.
Yeah, and do you have the public and the press? But you need to think about your shareholders also. I mean, that's probably thinking about the company, thinking about the shareholders to understand that context, and the responsibility of boards is very important in how do we then deal with all the other stakeholders, employees, investors, and NGOs. And you can see here, that's what we've been doing, I think, for the past 1 or 2 years. Here, we have put climate up as a stakeholder, actually. But this is reality, this is the world, this is the context. Board have to sort out how do we really balance or create synergies, and can we create synergies between show me the money, the financial value creation, and show me a better world.
Yes.
One important thing then for the company and the boardroom to think about is, what kind of a company are we really? Here we have tried to put up 3 different routes to value creation or value destruction, looking ahead from now on and to 2050. And the idea of this slide is...
And why do you mention 2050? Because this is the turning point for net zero. It's what has been put in front of us, at least.
And maybe it's becoming before that.
I hope so.
So therefore, we have to prioritize climate in one way or the other, maybe higher than today in many corporations. And the green one, the idea with the green one here is purpose to make it a better world. That actually is symbols kind of companies that are created based on the vision and the purpose to make it a greener and better world, or is able to transform themselves, reinvent themselves to being such a company. That's the one, the blue one, or maybe, and that would be the case, some companies, it wouldn't make sense to transform themselves. So what are the obligations of the board there? That's probably to maximize the value of the company and then have a liquidation, a soundly healthy liquidation, and give the assets or the proceedings from the liquidations back to the shareholders, so they can invest in one of the green companies for the future. But so in this context, and based on what type of company we are, there are some premises to be absolutely clear on with regards to what's the responsibility of the board of directors. And that's what laid out on this slide here. The board is collectively, as a team anyway, that's that's company law around here, responsible for the company. And in that, they must pursue the value interest of the company and the long-term value creation for the shareholders. And then what we have put up here is having in mind the business and societal context that the company is part of and of doing good for shareholders and society. And that trend have been becoming more and more clear over the past, say, Bente, 5 years. Yeah. That companies have to understand themselves as in a societal context. And if you look into the good for the stakeholders in society, then you prosper also better as a company and create long-term value for the shareholders.
It used to be a saying that the purpose of a company was only and solely to make profit. But nowadays we see more and more investors and business people arguing that if you take into consideration society and society's need in a broader prospect, yes, then you'll make the profit. So it's not a contradiction nowadays.
But it's easier said
than doing.
Than done. And some reinvention, transformation of business models, etc. Just now, where we earlier on today discussed the geopolitical issues of the world and the terrible war in Ukraine. I mean, the energy supply situation for many companies has changed, so they are not able to move on the short term into net zero as fast as they actually would have imagined.
There will be some problems for some companies, definitely. Yeah. But anyway, we can be happy or perhaps a little worried that the EU has paved the road for us in the sense that it's the private companies who are going to fix it. So we'll come back on this. It's on our agenda at board level.
Yeah, it is certainly so. And we outline here the two overall then responsibilities of the board. One is to look after and take there's a spelling mistake, take good care of the assets of the company. Actually, the board is entrusted those assets by the shareholders, and on the other hand, return a profit on the invested capital. And just to take a step back, this is not to forget. I don't know how much you work with that in your companies, but here around, this way of looking at the company is pretty important. It's the DuPont model. I don't know if you how much you know it, but it's outlined when you see it from a financial standpoint. When does a company really add value, economic value added, as EVA is standing for? And that takes that you return, the return on the invested capital is higher than the cost of capital. And capital costs are calculated. There's a nice formula in the bottom of the slides. I'm not going to go into many details on that. I'm just going to point to the RA at the end of that, because what that tells is that the cost of capital for a company actually depends on what's the risk of that type of a company in a given industry at a given time. And if you don't move green, then the risk profile of that business go up. So you can actually make the company create more value by reducing the risk profile of the company to take up the green transition as fast as you can, and maybe overinvest it in the beginning.
And green is not solely something for energy companies. It's very important to be focused on that's every company. It's all of us who is going to take part in this transition. So important.
But and then when you look at that, you also have to look at the risk in more dimension than only green, because there are other things, geopolitics, how we organize our operations, etc., that is financials that are associated with risk. So you have to work with a risk heat map. And the more you get into the green, the more you reduce the A here, the risk profile, and then you improve the economic added value of the company on the same giving sales and cost structure. That doesn't mean you shouldn't work on your profit margin and turnover and invested capital. That's key. That's basic. You've got to work with that, but also with the risk profile of the company. As then we move on here in the session on geopolitics and supply chains, Tom Behrens-Sørensen, who will be coming back here a little later for the panel discussion, he pointed to the 4 ACEs model, and that's the 4 ACEs of the board to make sure that value is created and something intelligent is going on within the company. It's stewardship, the duty of the best interest of the company, strategy, succession, and supervision. That's the duty to set objectives and monitor financial performance and oversee risk and risk resilience. And when we from there then move to kind of sustainable governance, because that's part of the supervision. How do we set up sustainable governance in our company? Then one can work with those different mechanisms or dimensions here in Bente.
Yeah, there's a lot of tools, and you should take care not to have a look at all of them. It might not be that you want to take into work all of it, but have the broad perspective. Have the open-mindedness to what's implication.
And overall, maybe, and that's natural, because you cannot make big decisions on the company's purpose without having a look at the articles and having a dialogue with the shareholders. And at the end of the day, it's the shareholders that decide what purpose do we have for the company when it goes into the company articles. So that's on the overall level. But from there on, you can work on different dimensions, actually taking strategy and risk governance. How do we build the sustainability perspective into how we work with that? Should we have how do we get sustainability committees into the boardroom? That's a heavy discussion around here. Will experts or specialists fit well into the board as a team, or is it better that you educate the board with the new competences needed? That is discussion you must take on an individual basis, but that's important. We have the same discussion about cybersecurity.
Have the discussion.
How do we get these competences into the boardroom? Could also have, should we have a sustainability committee? Then you'll have the option to add external, not board members, to the committee. So you can have, the more informed discussion there before you take them into the boardroom.
Yes.
Naturally, you should have a sustainable governance and where the company are right now in the green transition as part of the yearly planning cycle. And there are any requirements whatsoever around here for the large public companies, how do they report on it? And I guess it's the same in the Baltic states. And then at the bottom here, you can see, you can also, I think many companies would need to segment markets at choice of customers to follow the right strategy for the company in terms of being sustainable. And you probably have to make choices that we are not going to serve these markets and we are not going to serve these customers as we don't see a fit to that transformation the company has in front of it.
Okay, Tom, let's jump into Europe again, and let's jump into the item of European regulation on green transformation. And what I was just saying before is that you are going to fix it as a private company. The capital streams, the capital is supposed, and it's not to enter into green and sustainable projects. That's what sustainable finance and the EU's Green Deal is about. So a very ambitious net zero ambition for 2050 as a Green Deal, and sustainable finance as an important vehicle to make it happen. And you as the most important vehicle, the private companies. So as a company, you should be very much aware about this regulation. You might find it very heavy. You might think it's compliance, but it's there. It's not going to disappear. And it deals with data. It deals with transparency. It deals with putting sustainability on a formal, and the same with how the financial sector is going to work with this. And that's what we're going to discuss with you for the next 10 minutes. So in this very complicated regulation, be aware of at least three things, starting in the bottom, the taxonomy regulation. What EU is about to do is creating a new taxonomy for what's green, what's sustainable, so that it's no longer you or I or Tom who is going to define what's green or what's sustainable. So we're looking into a future where this is put on a formula. So that's what the taxonomy is about. And it's mandatory for financial companies and listed companies in phase one with more than 500 employees. But you also trade with huge companies, and they do not look at you if your number of employees are plus or minus 500. So be aware of this, no matter the size of your company. Then you have the non-financial disclosure regulation, the CSRD, And what's on our in the future coming up within 2 years or something is mandatory non-financial reporting directives, meaning that there are specific thresholds and targets you need to report on. And let's just mention carbon emission as one thing, and it's not only your own carbon emission. You need to take in consideration what is in your value chain. So it's across the value chain. So if you want to be ready for this in 2 years, you might start to think, how am I getting there already? And on the other hand, you have the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, meaning what the financial companies are going to disclose, and it's quite a lot. And they're going to disclose what they can get from you as non-financial companies. So it starts with the non-financial companies. Be aware of this very technical and complicated matter, because you need to live with it. And it also has a lot of positive impact, since in the future we do not need to discuss what's green, and when you have the annual report, it's no longer a question about your verbal description or about how good you are. Now it's back into the number thing we are looking at this. Just very short on the taxonomy, it deals with 6 environmental objectives, and we start with the climate thing, and that's for all purposes carbon emission, and it's very it's gone through a lot of iterations within the EU now, so it's more mature than the 4 rest. And the 4 rests, what are these items about? It's a transition to a circular economy. That means you're recycling, you're reusing of material. You will have to disclose your KPIs on this item as well. It also deals with pollution and prevention control, something with the water and biodiversity, meaning that it's not only about CO2, more is coming, but within the same context of you need to comply with the taxonomy if you enter into the right part of businesses. You need to comply with what's registered in the taxonomy for all these 6 areas.
And that's before
25, 24, 25, but it starts already now with the, it has started with
blue ones.
the blue ones. And the rest,
that's for this year.
Prepare for this within the next 2 years. And it's no excuse. I would not dare to think that, oh, it's only the listed companies, the big ones, unless you do not trade with them. If you're just on your own island, and not take part in a value chain with these companies, then of course you might be less vulnerable to this coming up. On the other hand, they are going to demand you to fit into what their reporting requirements are about. So how far is a meter? That's the principle. The EU is laying down now what is the taxonomy, what is green, what is circular, what's and so ever. So it's coming, even though it's not all finished, as an important tool in EU to make it all happen in 2050. This taxonomy, now we've heard about this regionalization of the world, and it is also a European taxonomy. And meaning that this is within the European context. It's not the same taxonomy in China, it's not the same in the US, although there might be a tendency to be more to get around and agree on the E stuff with the US and China, so to some degree, but not with S and not with other things. It's only the E within the ESG context. For the time being, we have a huge dilemma about data, what we started this with, and you also have these rating agencies who are rating companies. And the problem is they're rating on not common standards. They have their own standards. They have no sense of what's green. There's no common understanding. That's what the taxonomy is going to solve for us. So in a near future, in 2 years, something like that, let's just have a future within 2 years, this will be changed. So it'll enter into something that we all look upon in the same way. Back to what we were just discussing before about back in 1970, we had this Milton Friedman, a very famous American economist, saying that what we should be doing in companies was, as Tom said, value creation.
That was financial value, increasing profits.
Yeah, increasing profit, and it was not into a company's task to think about anything else than increasing profits. So, and where we are now is that we see, for instance, BlackRock, the largest investor in the world, putting everything on the green field on the table. Climate transition is, in their opinion, a historical investment opportunity. So they now advise all customers to go into shades of green.
But I mean, here we also have, remember the slide where we looked out at shareholders and stakeholders. And I mean, the shareholders here, the investors, if their objective is that the company should be in the lead of the green transition, I mean, that's what the board have to navigate after.
Yeah, definitely. This ESG stuff is on the move. Just an example from this Danish context. Numerous Danish asset managers have for years chosen not to invest in weapons and defense industry, but the Danish parliament, the Folketing, decided last year to buy a new aircraft with some price at least put on the tail of it. And now in spring 2022, after this sad story in Ukraine, the Danish pension funds have made a U-turn, and now they again invest in weapons and the military.
So you can't count on your investors all the way. You have to take the responsibility yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's on the move. What's good Latin, so to speak, today is not necessarily the way we look at it in 5 years. What is ESG versus old-fashioned CSR, so to speak? You might say that CSR, as we used to think of it, was the soft items typically closely linked to the communication department or the HR department. But nowadays, ESG is hardcore business. It's becoming regulated, as we just talked about, and you have these multiple drivers asking you to show your company contribution to the difficult items of society. So nowadays it's about your company purpose and strategy, and you can read it down there. It's jumping into the CFO area with data, and you need to get hold on your data. It's no longer a possibility that you can disclose something which you cannot explain. So it enters into business. Yeah. So how to organize? Just some examples from the board level. We have been talking about it. Something could be
sustainable governance. How could we do it? Committees, mixed committees, extension of committees.
Using your existing board committees, your risk, your...
Some does that, but I mean, that depends on the given company and the board, whether that would make sense. Then I'll put it in the risk committee.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And what is most important is the mindset of your company. How do you look at this? Are you able to understand this broader context and get the sustainability mindset into a collective view of long-term value creation and not a compliance issue, even though this EU stuff is definitely compliance-orientated and planning economy.
But what you also can say with this slide, Bente, is that each boardroom have to make up for themselves where are we and where will we be heading within this framework here.
Yeah. Just an example, you have all the slides afterwards from Danske Bank, how they organize. I'm not going to jump into it due to the time, and I'll just finish off with this one and the next slide. Take care about this CO2 emission, that you get it right. In the future, it's not only the task of your company to get hold on your own emission and what you get in from your energy consumption from your energy company. It's also about what's in your value chain. And you are typically also somebody else's value chain. And you are always in the value chain of your bank. And the bank is going to be more interested in you in this sense than you would like to think about now. For now, in the future, they are going to have a look on your CO2 emission, just as they look into the financial numbers. So just finishing, it's about the value chain. It's about the multiple stakeholder expectations for your positive impact. Something is coming up. You have this Corporate Social Reporting Directive. You have a corporate sustainability due diligence proposal and things like that. So be aware of this, the value chain, and all your multiple stakeholders. They will look into you.
Thank you.
So thank you, Bente and Tom. We got several questions, but in order to save the time, I will merge because they're similar. About the practical competences, skills, and mindset needed in the boardrooms to ensure success in the climate and the sustainability, and what is the current situation in Denmark? Is it already some changes are happening, or what? So just shortly.
Yeah, there's been made different reports and analysis about how do sustainability competences look like in the boardrooms of the larger corporations around here, and one can say it's a mixed picture, so to speak. Some have been moving quite fast in having sustainability competences in the boardrooms. Normally, that's the companies that for years have been working with CSR and maybe are sustainable companies by themselves.
But I would like to add that in the board positions I'm holding, it's nothing to do with CSR any longer. It has to do with risk, it has to do with risk management, it has to do with value creation. And it has a high focus on the value chain and a high focus on investors. What are their impression about the company and the banks?
But where do the competences come from? Because if you look at it by formal education, actually we don't have many people in the late 40s, 50s, and 60s that have a formal education you would characterize as competences within sustainability. So they have learned it by the executive jobs, other jobs, specialist jobs they have been doing in different companies. And then the question is, have they come on board? Yes, on a few out of many thousand companies. So, but it's beginning to pick up.
Yes.
So thank you very much once again. So big applauses, Bente and Tom.
Thank you.
Yes, so I hope we will see you in half an hour when we will have the interactive discussion, because we still have questions already on our Slido platform.
We have Tom here also.
Okay, very good. So see you soon.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we have our last but not least dessert topic. The topic is about sustainability amidst rising energy costs and other uncertainties. Maybe you heard already today saying that one of the most polluting industries are energy. I mean, coal and oil and so on. But there is one more industry that is quite polluting, and it's construction materials. And I would like now to invite on the stage Evita Gosha. She is a member of the management board, environmental and legal director at Švenk Latvia. And you will tell what Švenk is doing actually. So welcome. Here is the mic and there is the switcher.
Thank you. Dear friends of good corporate governance, thank you for having me. It is indeed not easy to be the last speaker, but I won't let you fall asleep. Believe me. And my proposal is the following, that first of all, I would like to tell a little bit about Švenk Group, then go into details of why sustainability matters really at all times, in times of peace, in times of war and uncertainties, and then explain and share experiences about what Schwenk is doing, because indeed, as Rytis already pointed out, cement industry in particular currently faces really huge challenges, probably the biggest challenges ever. And as our CEO says, we want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So let's jump in. So this is our geography. This is Schwenk Group. Really, so first of all, established already 175 years ago. It is still a family-owned company. And yeah, it sounds surprising, especially in this audience, but I will explain why that actually is still good. And being listed is not always just the only solution. So for actually very long time, Schwenk was based only in Germany, with a key business area indeed being cement production. But then with time, gradually, it also started production of ready-mix concrete. And also, of course, extracting aggregates, because this is first of all part of cement and concrete business, but then also became a separate business. So currently, Schwenk Group employs more than 3,000 people in Europe, and it is, being a family-owned company, still a leader in sustainability and innovation. And later on, I will show you how. Especially for Northern Europe, it was indeed a very interesting experience, because until 2019, when Schwenk expanded to Northern Europe, our Latvian assets and in general our Northern European assets were part of a listed company of Cemex, which is a global company present in approximately 50 countries of the world. Of course, at the time of that transaction, we were a little bit worried about what will happen, how it will be, you know, this transition from being a listed company to family-owned company. Schwenk is also a brand, maybe not very well known. So now it is, I hope, but at least until 2019, it was not, because it was still pretty much local German company with some joint ventures also in Central European countries. And currently, if we speak about the company I am active in mainly, which is Schwenk Latvia, we have, let's say, our key asset is our cement plant, the only cement plant in Latvia located in Brocēni near Saldus in Latvia. And we also have several ready-mix concrete plants and also aggregate quarries. And in Northern Europe, we mainly have seaport terminals and our trading companies, because approximately 70% of our cement we export to Northern European countries. So this is our state-of-the-art cement plant in the Baltic. Like each Baltic country has one of them, but the one in Latvia is, and I won't exaggerate, and I don't want to somehow boast, but it is indeed one of the most modern cement plants in Europe, and it is also the newest, and that's also the reason and gives us that advantage of being one of the most modern plants in Europe. And now I will jump in on why I have this opinion that sustainability matters, especially for our industry, and why it matters really in the times of peace and also especially in times of uncertainties, and then move on what makes me believe so, based on our experience. Actually, I would say that for our industry specifically, and in general, I would really try to generalize that, the strong sustainability performance is actually the only way forward, because we indeed can't compromise future generations and future in general, just because we want to earn more today and extract more from nature than actually we can afford. And it is science that we have done actually for too long. We have done that. So this is the only way forward, and that's why we believe in sustainability performance. Sustainability performance helps to build business resilience. I really like this term because it's not just continuity. It really, I think, entails everything that business needs. You know, being ready for disruptions, for crisis. Sustainable actions help to ensure that. Brand value, reputation, competitive advantage, that I think goes without saying. Consumer demands. I already mentioned that we export approximately 70% of our cement to northern European countries, and customers there are very demanding, and they demand low CO2 emissions, low impact on environment, and we want to deliver. We want to make sure that we are as environmentally friendly as possible. Efficiency, sustainable performance also creates new ways and ideas on how to use resources. And creates also new business opportunities. We currently act in ways which we couldn't imagine them years ago. Talent attraction. It is also no particular news that currently employees also look for sustainability. They are not satisfied anymore just with earning their salary. They ask for more, and we want to deliver that. Also, we demand a lot from ourselves, and we dare to demand that from others. So we as a company, for instance, we also are active in ask for sustainable action, both from other private sector players and from public sector. We ask for fighting shadow economy, for instance, for reasonable implementation of Green Deal and so forth. And well, as especially for me as a lazy person in general, it is a self-motivation tool that just helps to go on. And if we move to the times of crisis and or uncertainties, I think all of the previously mentioned items are still valid and relevant. But I would like to add a few more, why sustainability matters even more in the times of uncertainty. Crisis is like a mirror. So if we look into the mirror, and then what do we see there? And there is a comparison that comes to my mind with respect to sustainability and times of uncertainty. It's like a general health checkup. So yeah, from time to time we have those, but imagine that you have that health checkup unexpectedly. Like I tell you, like tomorrow, you have it tomorrow, and then you think, it's probably going to be like just blood pressure and probably a blood test, but then it turns out that it's actually your heart, your kidneys, and so forth. And then the question is, like, have you been maybe smoking too much, or cognac every evening was not that good idea, and same applies to your performance before the crisis. So what about that smoking or cognac every evening? Or maybe it was just mineral water and exercise. So, if you have been exercising, if you have been studying, then also the time of crisis is probably not hitting you that hard, right? And if you have been performing sustainably during the times of certainty, then In times of uncertainty, you also still have a possibility to develop and innovate. And you are not stuck with survival issues. You're not stuck with thinking, you know, will I be able to pay my bills or pay my suppliers? You would still be thinking about investing, and this is what Schwenk has been doing, for instance, during pandemic. So our latest investments in sustainable infrastructure equipment in approximately worth approximately 34 million. We have been making these investments in last couple of years, actually, exactly during the time of pandemic, just because we were acting sustainably and we wanted to continue doing that because we understand the meaning of sustainability. And of course, times of crisis still give us an opportunity to continue to build resilience. We see more risks, we see more possibilities to mitigate those risks in the future. Then still, I would like to have your involvement, because I still meet people who kind of, yeah, don't actually know the difference, for instance, between cement and ready-mix concrete, which is kind of not maybe a very big deal, but still, I just wanted to show you that slide to show the impact we make as a company, as Rytis actually already pointed out, but this is in more detail. So indeed, we are a very energy-intensive and resource-intensive industry, as you can see, that for production of cement, which is actually the key building material for many other building materials, and we still can't survive without those in our daily lives and businesses. So this is just to illustrate how cement is made, and then further on concrete is made. And indeed, as you can see here in that slide, lots of natural resources are involved in that process. The good thing is that most of them are local, so they don't have to be imported from other countries. And if we move on then deeper to our sustainability performance, then this first slide shows on how we do that in very general terms. So indeed, we have sustainability integrated in our business strategy, and we look for sustainability performance in all our supply chain, from suppliers through us to our customer base. And of course, we understand that we are far from being perfect, and we will, of course, still continue improving our performance there. And we build our sustainability activities around three key pillars, being people, environment, and industry. And these activities, sustainability activities, incorporate our 4 values, which I will just show you in the next slide. And yeah, SDGs have been mentioned already several times today, so we take those into consideration as well. And these are our values, and indeed these are not just, again, values being written somewhere and gathering dust, but indeed we highly value these values and integrate them and in our activities and think about them actually every day. And these are health and safety. So this has been for many years, long before Green Deal. Actually, health and safety has been our #1 priority, because so we are in production. We have high risks for people's health, high risks of accidents taking place, and we actually have raised our bar, and our health and safety framework, legal framework, internal framework is much actually much more demanding than just simply standard legal requirements in Latvia or in other countries. Growth, again, like very responsible growth, not growth, let's say, at all cost, but indeed sustainable growth. Collaboration, we value highly diversity of our employees, of our management, everybody, also in our supply chain, and responsibility, of course, because as I mentioned, we celebrate 175th birthday this year, and so we are in transition from 5th to 6th generation of the owners of the company, and responsibility is indeed not just a word. So this is a way how to move forward. And our mission statement, which was elaborated by actually a broad range of our Northern European colleagues. So it is not just, let's say, some kind of like management statement or PR statement. So it was really elaborated in a very broad theme. We deliver sustainable concrete innovations for generations to come. Again, emphasis on generations. And let's move on. Our values, as just mentioned, so they are incorporated also in our Code of Ethics, which is a universal document for our Northern European operations. They set forth our key values, key principles on how we operate. So this is basically our constitution. And this Code of Ethics, again, is not just some kind of declaration, but it is a compulsory document. This is an annex to all employment agreements, and this is basically the norms contained in Code of Ethics are binding. And this document also sets forth the whistleblowing mechanism and invites employees really to report and ask questions, and basically sets forth this spirit of openness we have in our company to ensure really a healthy working environment. And then, just let's say some other key elements on how we implement sustainability performance in the company. So we have 4 management systems in place, and all covered by the integrated health and safety, quality, environment, and energy policy. As mentioned, we are a very energy intensive industry in general, and we are actually the biggest consumer of electricity in Latvia. To be very specific, so of course energy efficiency is a very important topic for us. Then contractor and supplier management, we will still have to continue to improve our performance there. We have several thousand suppliers, and of course it's not easy to control all of them. Environmental product declarations, as mentioned, for our especially our customers in Northern Europe, we wouldn't be able to even export without preparing those, showing our impact and showing the life cycle of our products. Circular economy principles are extremely important for us. We have, if we speak about our cement production, then we have absolutely closed production cycles. For instance, all the, just as an example, and we will go into more detail, all ashes from our fuels we use go to our product. So basically, cement used by customers also contain ashes from the fuels we use. And these are so-called alternative fuels, not fossil fuels mainly. Even though legal requirements don't demand that from us, we also prepare sustainability reports because, as mentioned, especially for lazy people, this is a very good tool to discipline themselves. And we have 2 very important mission zeros. So one is regarding health and safety, which I already mentioned, and then the one I live in mostly, and this is my basically daily duty. This is work with respect to diminishing CO2 emissions. As mentioned, I'm responsible for environmental performance in the company. And we have elaborated a roadmap or a clear plan with clear-cut steps regarding reduction of CO2 emissions and actually reaching climate neutrality until year 2035 in Brocēni plant in Latvia, and hopefully already by 2030 in one of our plants based in Germany. Now, why, as Rytis mentioned, our industry historically has been polluting. And I really want you to see that slide because it is extremely important. So it is not just that cement industry is somehow irresponsible and, you know, they just want these emissions, you know, to go into the air. It is absolutely not like that. Our industry actually for many years, like very many responsible players have already been paying attention to emission issue, and that slide explains why this is not that easy. So only approximately 1/3 of our emissions are, let's say, originate from fuels used. And that's exactly the reason why we have gone already for many years, why we have gone from using fossil fuels, mainly in cement industry, this is coal and natural gas, why we have moved away from that and why we use alternative fuels. And only and actually 2/3 of emissions originate from this whole technological process of how cement clinker is produced. So basically that CO2 is bound in limestone, which is the key natural resource for production of cement. And when, let's say, the limestone is burned or incinerated in the kiln, it decarbonizes, and that's how these emissions basically, you know, come out, and that's exactly the most difficult part on how to change that technological process, that these emissions are at least reduced, if not eliminated completely. And let's move on. So our plan consists of 3 huge goals, and the first goal is related to usage of fuels. As mentioned, we have been using already for many years, and here in this slide we can see how we have increased the usage of these alternative fuels, and I will just very quickly describe what those are. The key alternative fuel we use is the so-called solid recovered fuel, which is basically a fuel prepared from municipal and industrial waste. So this is not waste, this is fuel. So meaning that, and maybe again, just to visualize why it is not just waste, that let's say the requirements, the quality requirements for this fuel are on approximately 4 pages. And that's why it is not that easy to prepare this fuel from the waste, as we have discussed that. And that's also the reason why, unfortunately, we still have to import approximately 70 to 80% of that fuel, mainly from UK, even though we have enough waste in Latvia. But why this solid recovered waste is important? The first one, which I already mentioned, is the element of circular economy, that basically there's no waste from this fuel at the end of the process, because the ashes from that fuel go to the product we produce. This is the first reason why this is good. The second reason is, of course, Green Deal itself, reduction of emissions. And the third reason, especially after 24th of February, is that we don't have to import coal. And we know that one source of coal is Russia. and we used to, at some point, import coal from Russia, and we don't do it anymore, of course, and we will most likely never do that. And the good news is that actually in April, we already have reached, let's say during several days, we have reached 100% usage of alternative fuels. And but in any case, our goal is to reach approximately like stable 98%. So currently we are approximately 90 something, a little bit. But why actually, let's say maybe the impact of reduction of usage of fossil fuels can be seen in this slide. So altogether, in the period of 10 years, we have reduced our emissions for approximately 35%, which is huge. This is a really huge reduction. Now we move to the second goal, and this is the so-called elimination or reduction of clinker factor in cement, because the let's say when we burn limestone together with other natural resources in specific combination, then we produce the clinker, which is like the main then product for production of and grinding of cement. We work and well, in a way, experiment on creating new cement types that would need less clinker, which is again a key reason why we have the emissions, why we have these CO2 emissions. So we try to use alternative materials in order to ensure that there is lower clinker factor in cement. And the third goal, and this is really, really my passion indeed, because it involves new technologies, and this is carbon capture storage, and or carbon capture utilization part. And this is the way how actually the EU as a whole and our industry, this is the only way how we would be able to reach climate neutrality, because there are industries which won't be able to eliminate creation of CO2 emissions completely. It is not possible, at least today it is not possible, and therefore we need these technologies that would help us capture carbon, and that we actually again change the thinking, same as we did with waste. At some point we just thought waste is waste, it's something dirty and not useful. Same thing applies to CO2, that we actually turn our thinking in a way that CO2 is a product that can be used for something else, for instance, for production of different kind of new fuels. And this is exactly what we want to do. I'm also part of trying to build supply chains also for our region, how to do that. So we are the source of CO2, and we are looking for other partners who would be able to then implement the rest of this of these supply chains. And Andris, Rytis, if we have time, I would like to just show one short video about let's say visualizing on approximately what I have just been talking about. Yeah, because we are currently part at the group level, and also locally we are part of several projects on how to do that best, because even that capture part is not that easy. Maybe some of you have heard that of things like that, of course, happen in many places in the world, but the problem with these solutions, at least at this point of time, is that they are not turnkey, they are not ready-made. Something that works, for specific plant or specific industry does not automatically mean that it also works, for instance, our plant or our industry. That's why, this is so complex and does not happen so fast. So, guys, if this is still possible, let's just show a video.
Atmospheric warming due to greenhouse gases has become a serious global concern. The growing demand for energy makes fossil fuel consumption inevitable, in spite of their high GHG emissions, while the shifting from fossil fuel to renewable energy has been slow. CO2 capture technologies is one of the direct answers to this problem. Genesis project aimed to develop and upscale some of the most promising materials for CO2 capture and demonstrate their performance, durability, and reliability in industrial environments. The materials that were developed and upscaled within the Genesis project were IPOSS, polyposamide hybrid organic-inorganic, and MOF, metal organic framework membrane systems, with great performance for CO2 capture. The membranes have a high gas perm selectivity and stability at high temperatures and can be produced at a large scale. The nanostructured materials like MOF and POSS can be tailored to obtain suitable membrane selectivity and permeability characteristics. These membranes were tested in Schwenk, Latvia cement plant in Brocēni, Latvia, which belongs to a carbon-intensive industry, and aim to achieve at least 90% of CO2 recovery at a cost below current available technologies.
Concrete is the second world's most used substance after water. To have concrete, we need cement. In the cement production industry, we know two types of sources for the CO2. One being from combusting the fuels in order to reach these high temperatures. Others being decarbonization process of limestone, which is main raw material for cement clinker. We as Schwenk Latvia, we already are working and consuming as much as 85% non-fossil fuels. This is helping already to reduce the CO2 emission as much as possible. However, in order to have the CO2 sustainability goals fulfilled completely, we need the technology like this we are having here, the CCU or CCS. Genesis pilot project plan that we are having here is as a first step for us in order to achieve our sustainability goals long term.
Although the Brocēni cement plant is already one of the most modern and environmentally friendly in Europe, the company faces the challenges in achieving the objectives of the EU Green Deal. The cement plant of Schwenk, Latvia, was hosting the demonstration system of the Genesis project for post-combustion CO2 capture.
Genesis is a 4-year project what was started in 2018 and was finishing in beginning of 2022, and biggest our target was in 2018 and 90 to send all our process data to our partners that they can analyze our process and to prepare for us special membranes for test plant. Then the second biggest target was in 2019-20 when was started construction process there in our Brocēni cement plant, when was built construction foundations, additional gas pipeline, electricity, technical water and sewage water systems. The test plant can operate and can give us good results.
Genesis project consortium partner from Israel, Yodfet Engineers, played an important role in the project. Experts of Yodfet designed and built a pilot plant in Brocēni cement plant. Yodfet engineers had assessed the long-term performance of IPOSS and MOF membranes developed under real conditions.
Yodfet engineers from Israel in charge with the design and build pilot plant using 140 square meters, treating 250 normal cubic meter per hour at Schwenk cement Brocēni, Latvia. What is a membrane? Imagine a two-compartment box. One compartment with high pressure would be the place where the feed comes in, and the other compartment with low pressure where from the product will go out. The membrane is a selective membrane preferring the fast passage of CO2 over the passage of other gases. The gas would come out of the stack at a concentration of 13% CO2 and would undergo the following: particle removals, cooling, compression, membrane stage 1, vacuum stage 1, membrane stage 2, vacuum stage 2, all leading to the product of 90% CO2.
Yodfet engineers implemented automation control systems in the demo site and validated its reliability under real conditions.
The system mostly is autonomous, only little human input is required. It can be operated both locally and remotely. Every process in the system has monitoring devices that gives us reliable data.
The Genesis project is an important step towards the use of new technological solutions for capturing, purifying, storing, and reusing CO2 emissions in real life to help to achieve the global climate goals by reducing CO2. such a future technology is very much needed.
Thank you, Evita. I think that we already can come to our last part, this interactive discussion, because we received quite a lot of questions. I believe that our Danish colleagues, speakers, are also with us.
Have you said that? Yeah, we are here.
Excellent. Excellent, excellent. So I will be going through the questions we received one by one by mixing the questions to one another and so on, speakers. So Evita was not getting the questions as well, and she's kind of very fresh. And the last one. So actually there are quite difficult questions, challenging questions anyway. So what reporting standards Schwenk uses for its sustainability report? Do you plan to report sustainability KPIs, means CapEx, OpEx, turnover, under taxonomy regulation for 2022 onwards? And if so, what obstacles you encounter, if any, and how to prepare for it? Please share good practices and practical tips.
So as mentioned in my presentation, so forth, actually we are not under the legal obligation to prepare sustainability reports. We do that just because we believe that this is a good practice, good governance element, and we prepare these reports, which are available on our website schwenk.lv, according to GRI standards, then taking into consideration the relevant SDGs we have identified as the most relevant for us. So we measure basically our key impact elements with respect to E, with respect to with respect to G. And regarding taxonomy, so far, let's say until now, to the best of our knowledge, to the best of my knowledge, I have to say, so we have received the first request actually from one of our banks regarding our CO2 footprint. But the good thing regarding us is that, first of all, so we are part of the EU emission trading system. So we have, of course, let's say, very detailed standards on how we calculate our impact with respect to CO2. But we, as mentioned, also go much further. So we also calculate life cycle of our, let's say, most polluting product, if I may say so. So we don't foresee like any like specific issues regarding that. So, but again, we are in line of really the best, let's say, practices, so forth. And of course, we are ready also for further developments, as mentioned and described by Danish colleagues regarding further requirements from the EU regarding reporting, and we are ready basically for let's say further detailed reporting. And yeah, I don't know if I answered in any case. If, let's say, the person asking this question, I would like to then discuss more
discuss afterwards, after our interactive
but I hope
discussion.
I answered.
Yes. So next question will go to Denmark. What about what opportunities do you see for Baltic businesses to take advantage in the business areas where Russia is losing or is going to lose its footing?
Well, that's a good question, and obviously requires a lot of insight into Baltic, the Baltic industrial DNA, your fortes. Actually, Tom and I, just before this part here, were sort of looking at your industrial clusters. The way we understand them, a lot of focus obviously on wood, the whole industry around wood, forestry, foodstuff, tech. Tech stands out for me as being one of your fortes as well. I was surprised to see chemicals in there. I would think that with sanctions on Russia, on Russian exports, I would think in particular that in the wood, the forestry area where Denmark has been importing a lot also from Russia, there will be major opportunities. So that's definitely one area I can see. The biggest import, as you know, for Denmark is energy. It's coal, it's gas, in particular from Russia. And I guess in that field, there's not a lot you can offer to Denmark. That's really.
We are not importing that much ourselves directly, but into the EU, where we are part of the kind of power system.
But I think reflecting on the trade statistics that Tom and I just went through, the trade between the Baltic states and Denmark seems quite modest. Obviously, Estonia being closer to Finland. Finland is a big trading partner. Sweden, significantly so, it seems also. And there will seem to be opportunities, for increased trade between the Baltic states and Denmark. And the question here is, how do we tap into that?
But I think overall, I mean, if one follow the scenario that Thomas Arenkiel laid out about Russia being kind of taken out of the equation at least for 10 years, I mean, there will be multiple opportunities, not only in Denmark, but I think also with a broader scope for overtaking the products, whatever they have exported, save for gas and coal. So just get going, I would say.
If I was to single out one particular area, disregarding Russia, and irrespective of whether that there has been a Russian invasion into Ukraine or not, I would say it's tech, the tech area. We're short of hands in Denmark. I'm myself a business angel.
Short of heads.
We're short of hands.
Heads.
And both hands and heads. Yeah, you're right. Heads. And I think, there you have a lot to offer. We're both small economies, but we really need, well-educated people with a tech background, with digital skills.
Yeah. I guess that we are at least 10,000 IT specialists short these days. Yeah. And the demand for expertise also in the cybersecurity area is just growing. Mm-hmm. So that could be either by taking a job remotely, but rather I think also consultancies to Denmark, Sweden, Norway, for that sake, on those kind of competences. Cybersecurity, that's going to be in heavy demand. As far as I see it for coming years.
Just one example, if I may. I'm currently in dialogue with a Norwegian company that has built a digital platform. Now, they did body swapping. They have an outfit in Russia, and they've been propelled to relocate the entire team out of Russia. They relocated it back into the Stan countries. Why? I'm not sure why they haven't relocated into the Baltic states instead. That seems to me to be a more obvious choice.
Okay, thank you very much. So next question will go to Vidmantas. Actually, you mentioned during your presentation so many items, so many steps, so many actions that you made during all these years, I mean these difficult years. Can you name at least several that were the most challenging, the most demanding for you as a board, of course?
Probably one thing is the team. Probably it's the most difficult to decide who would have to lead, how we should assemble the team, on which qualities we should assemble the team to go through a difficult time, because it's very difficult to predict who will not break under pressure, who would even improve in the difficult situation. So I would say this is one of the difficult decisions because you have to do it in advance, and it's difficult to predict the outcome. Another thing is, of course, working on the prognosis of the future, on the business of the future, because especially, for example, now in the fitness industry, there is a question of digital exercise arising, and should you invest there? How much will the brick and mortar clubs stay, and how you should balance between these two? Should you be participating in both industries and just not to lose some position in the market? So probably the decision on the future development on the high level. So these two topics, I would say.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now turn to Evita. Maybe I will try to combine two. So when do you think your CO2 capturing piloting project will be ready to scale up within the other Schwenk production plants? And another more specific, technical, where does go those membranes which have been used in CO2 capturing processes?
Thank you. As mentioned, we currently participate in several projects, so this was just, let's say, to give you an impression, I mean, that short video, you know, so that you get into the spirit of what that means. Currently, there are approximately 8 technologies, CO2 capture technologies available, and they're still being tested. One challenge related actually to them all is the energy consumption, and let's say if this is energy not let's say renewable energy, then this is of course additional issue. So you can capture CO2, but again, if CO2 is emitted while producing electricity, then this is a vicious circle, and there's actually no point in even doing that. So currently at the group level, we have even a maybe more meaningful, in a way, project in one of our German plants, where we even will erect a pilot cement plant, which is a little bit, of course, smaller than the real one, but it will be, you know, really a cement plant to test really already at certain scale this capture technology planned to be there, and most likely then this CO2 produced and captured there then would be used for production of a certain type of aviation fuel. So there is already a certain agreement with one of the airports in Germany that let's say that this is gonna happen, and in any case that this will take some time. So during this year the erection of this pilot plant is planned, and then further on these tests made, and then this let's say test fuel made as well. Yeah, so we still target, as mentioned, to be ready and in, let's say, in several years, so that we can reach potentially the climate neutrality with these kind of projects in 10 and more years, and until 2035. Therefore, it is still at this point difficult to state that we would be definitely ready by, for instance, I don't know, year 26 or 27, because currently still, you know, this we are in a process, and this is not a process carved in stone. We are still testing several technologies, several ways of then what to do with that captured CO2. For instance, in Latvia, we are also considering a potential storage, at least temporary storage, because the amount currently we emit of CO2, this is difficult to immediately utilize. We need some kind of storage place for that CO2, and we are still under investigation on how to best approach that, how to best solve it. That's why I can't give any definite carved in stone timeline, but approximately like that. We have several projects with specific timelines, but if they succeed, I really can't say at this point of time.
Okay, in the process.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
We would like to, we have to go actually in 6 minutes.
Okay, so I will ask you last
questions coming this way.
So one question, I think it will be short. How strong is sentiment in Denmark to limit or prohibit public spending, public procurements, etc., on Chinese technologies, products, services, and so on? Or do you like Chinese production still? I mean, the public procurements. This is specifically about it, not the private.
I think it's fair to say that we are not at a stage yet where there is an anti-Chinese sentiment amongst consumers. So if you're talking B2C, consumers vote with their feet, with their purse strings right now, and Chinese products are generally quite competitively priced. But I would say that there is one Chinese company that really has faced the wrath of Danish regulators is Huawei. Huawei, has actually built a significant foothold in Denmark years back. They were a major supplier, to some of the big telecom companies in Denmark, and they found themselves in hot waters. And actually, the Danish government, behind the scenes, initiated, a ban on Huawei.
But I think that was part of a basically Western world.
That's correct.
Exercise. So I think Chinese companies that carries technology that could be used for capture and IP stuff, other things, intelligence from Denmark and any Western world, they will have a hard time going forward.
Okay, so thank you very much. I understand.
Chinese products. I mean, China is producing a lot of stuff we are using around here.
If you look at the sheer numbers, I like to be fact-based. If you look at the growth in trade between China and Denmark, 2021 trade grew by 21% in euro terms, and it is growth both ways. It's a fairly balanced trade, in terms of export from Denmark and import from China. Fairly balanced. Investments, though, are tilted in Denmark's favor into China, in particular also accelerated by Maersk's investment in Li and Fung. Very few investments into Denmark by Chinese companies. If you look at sheer numbers, there are 700 Danish companies with an actual presence in China, including Hong Kong. There are only around 50 Chinese companies that have a presence on the ground in Denmark. So that sort of speaks its own language.
But I mean, one would expect, depending on what scenario we see going forward for the geopolitical kind of world we're looking into, that the deglobalization may very well mean that that investments and moving a lot of one's business to China, that would be up for a lot of considerations.
Without a doubt. But can I just mention one fact here, which is often overlooked in Denmark? If you look at sheer numbers in terms of Denmark's direct exports, as measured the traditional way, China is today the 5th largest trading partner for Denmark, with a market share of roughly 5% of our export. If you look at indirect, including, for instance, semi-components that go to Germany, German car industry, China is now the 3rd largest trading partner with Denmark at 7.7%. And Germany is number 2 at 8.1%. So it is a very, very large trading partner. And I see continued growth in that space there. But as Tom's saying, we will have to be more selective, and we'll have to be better at resorting to reciprocity.
Yeah, and maybe hope the good wishes about the war in Ukraine will, like China will come out of that in a way that globalization will not stop. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. You have to go. So thank you very much. So for joining us today, it was really valuable.
Good luck with the business.
Vilnius or elsewhere in the Baltic states.
Yes. So thank you. Bye. Okay, so we are continuing with two that we have here. So for Vidmantas, just a second, I was having this. Okay, so the lessons you have learned, you made kind of points here. But what about do you have something on the list to do based on the lessons you have learned during this?
Yeah, I actually thought that I didn't mention one very important lesson, which now I'm thinking like week after week when I'm looking at the different actions that company takes now, that difficult decisions are better to made fast. And when you are facing very complicated situation, you don't wait with difficult decisions. For example, we were thinking about closing one low-performing club that didn't fit our vision for 3 years, and we closed it in 2 weeks. We closed, we agreed with the landlord. Well, we got in the fight with the landlord, and we agreed with the landlord, we shake hands, we paid the fine, that's it, and the problem is diminished. And we are so happy now that we did this. But now, when we came out of this big depression, one part of it, so now there are a few more difficult decisions that are hanging there in the air. And then I see how the management and the board are waiting like, well, yeah, we should do this, but maybe it's not the time. Maybe we should do it after these 3 steps that we're already doing. Maybe it's too difficult to get into this situation. And then I understand that if there would be a question of life and death, we would do it at once, in a day. And now we're just taking our time. We live too good. So I think in our companies, we always live too good, every day. And if something would change, so we know what we would do, deep in our hearts. We would already have 3 to 5 topics in our mind that we have to do tomorrow. to close, to change, to convert, to rearrange. It's really like we understand these things. And also about this ESG, I really liked the slide that said that sustainability is the mindset, it's not the structure. So some things should be like in a mindset, like if we understand that we need to change something, let's change it. Let's not wait until life will make us change it the hard way. So that's probably one of the big lessons.
Thank you. And 2 short questions to Evita. Still last year, Akmenės Cementas was, so it's in the very north of Lithuania, if you didn't know, production facility was using coal from Russia as one of the energy sources. How it was replaced? It was replaced nowadays when sanctions are in place.
May I immediately answer?
Yes,
yeah?
enable.
First of all, actually, thanks for reminding me regarding the membranes. I didn't answer particularly about those membranes in the first place. So I have to ask our cooperation partner what exactly they're going to do with these membranes after the completion of the project, because these are not our membranes. So this is our cooperation partner, Jotfat, which appeared also on that video. So I will come back to whoever asked that question. But then going to Akmenės Cementas. Yes, Schwenk Group finally managed to acquire majority stake in Akmenės Cementas. Cemex tried to do that for many years, but did not succeed. So this is the only cement plant located in Lithuania. And well, I can be very open about that cement plant and the company itself. I am also on the board of that company. When we speak about sustainability, first of all, so I mainly told the story of our Brocēni plant, which indeed is a state-of-the-art plant, and we have really invested a lot so that this plant indeed becomes as sustainable as possible, using the best available technologies that, let's say, science and engineering has or is able to provide us with as a society, as business. Unfortunately, this is not exactly the case with respect to Akmenės Cementas due to historical reasons, due to the former ownership structure. Unfortunately, this, let's say, the sustainability investment had not reached that cement plant at the time when actually you know, it was necessary for it. And if we compare now Brocēni plant with Akmenės cement plant with respect to fuel usage, it is absolutely true that when I described our Brocēni plant, that we use more than 90% of alternative fuels at this point of time. This is not the case for Akmenės Cementas plant, and exactly due to the reason, and again, there are many reasons behind that, but that there was not, let's say, this sustainable thinking already years ago. And now we have to speed up a lot. And it is true that it is, first of all, so this is coal in general, which is absolutely not sustainable, agreed. I think we don't have any disagreement with respect to that. Yes, it was also coal from Russia, but of course, at this point of time, we don't speak about coal from Russia in the first place. And we also, as a group, will do everything possible to try to make the necessary investments as soon as possible. So the first stage is already there to substitute usage of coal as such also in Akmenės Cementas plant. So this is in the process, in the making right now as we speak here.
Okay, so thank you. It's great to hear that in Lithuania we also have a more greener production. Okay, so the next short question, I believe. How does your company, Švenk, Latvia, compare to competition on sustainability or CO2 and so on and so on?
Yeah, as mentioned, so this is one of the most modern plants in Europe, and it is, let's say, measurable. I mean, this is not just my statement. You know, if we speak specifically about CO2, so we are, let's say, at the top when it comes to CO2 emissions. As mentioned, we are also part of emissions trading system of the European Union, and yeah, so we are among leaders, let's say, among best performers when it comes to CO2 emissions for the industry.
Thank you. And now the last question for both, and it will be killing question. No? Be prepared. How boards and the management should prepare for the current and next Black Swans? So, Vidmantas, yeah, take the bullet first.
I remember when we were coming out of this pandemics and we were on the final stages on signing these bonds issue with a Polish fund, and they were trying to ask similar question, like they said, so okay, you manage the situation, but what if there will be another thing or something would change, and then nobody mentioned this Black Swan, the war. Nobody thought about that, you know, last year. But it said before, you know, signing this, giving the money. So how would you act? I said it is really the resilience of the company and the team. We will adapt. We don't know what will come out of this gate but we understand that we should be prepared, and we should do whatever it takes, and we should not limit ourselves to what we were thinking yesterday. Like we can completely change our mind facing this new enemy. And I think this is what the world is doing with the Ukraine today. Nobody thought that we will be doing these things that we're doing today, you know, helping, volunteering, supporting, transferring money, but we do. So I think it should be the mindset of the company. You should be resilient, prepared for everything, and you should be brave to discuss all ideas with the team, including. The team should be open to do anything, even look at their own position and said, maybe I'm not needed here today as it is now. Well, that would be the open topic to discuss, which is very difficult. But you can reach this point. So I believe being open to anything and resilient, it's probably the answer.
Yeah, but here is the point. I think that when the kind of black swan is coming in, so actually you have to have the team ready for that. Not only you or just the board of whatever, 5 people or so, but I mean the whole organization. So it means that the whole organization should be ready, not only you. Am I right?
Yeah, and that was probably part of this discussion that I said taking place 6-7 years ago. It was part of the exercise that we have done with the management. Like, what would happen the worst? Then what would be our plan? And then looking at this plan, saying maybe we could do some part of this. And usually there is always, like, if there would be something happening next year, it's like super terrible. What can you imagine for your industry? The worst thing. What would you do then? Maybe you can do some things in advance. Now, today, you will be more prepared. So, and if you will communicate this to the team and you discuss together, they will put some great ideas on the table. Say, yeah, maybe then we should like do that or another thing. And then some of these things will be doable today and they will give value today.
Okay, thank you very much. And your insights.
Yeah, well, I think everybody updated their risk agendas on 24th of February or a couple of days later. And we did that as well, of course. But in our case, let's say the current crisis actually, let's say business-wise, didn't hit us very hard, again, due to our sustainability performance before that crisis, be it pandemics and or times of peace and no pandemic. Because let's say when it comes to Green Deal, specifically for our industry, let's say all the activities we had been performing before the war, they were already, let's say, in that direction of, for instance, not having like vulnerable supply chains, for instance, or let's say cooperation partners in those regions, which we now especially see that they are not reliable and probably won't even become, let's say, relevant in 10 or more years. So our activities prove to be correct in this regard. So again, mentioning our usage of alternative fuels as one good example. So moving towards the Green Deal goals, we simultaneously removed our vulnerability stemming from the war at this point of time. And this is just one example. And indeed, resilience has been mentioned several times today, and this is it. So we are basically looking still at our risk agenda. But again, I'm convinced that we are prepared pretty well, because we want to be the front runners. We want to be one step ahead already in evaluating all the risks we are able to see. And we, again, one minor example being, let's say, even sustainability report. We understand that at some point we would be required to do that, but we actually have been doing already. We have been training well, and it won't be an issue for us. We won't have to invest time in planning doing that, just because we are already there. So we will have more time for either mitigating next risks, let's say upcoming risks, or doing something else. So we really try to be, let's say, one step ahead.
Thank you very much. So that was the last question. So we are kind of in time. So thank you all. Before I will thank our speakers and close our conference, I would like to make an announcement about the board decision that was done, Lina, I think 2 days ago. Yes. So that decision was made in the benefit and in the name of our members and our community, all you participating today in this conference, all our speakers. And this decision was about the support of Ukraine and to donate 1,000 euros. And now we are just selecting the most suitable organizations that can help with this money to do maximum value that we think Ukraine needs today. I understand that it needs a lot, but at least from our small organization, it will be some support as well. So I would like to thank the board for this decision. Okay, so and as with Jānis, we have colorful, natural, and very light, tiny, small, sweet things. Thank you. Thank you. So thank you for coming. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for participation. I think you gathered a lot of different ideas. Of course, by the way, the presentations will reach you soon. And I think you will use all these ideas and the knowledge you collected today in your work where are you engaged everywhere. So thank you and see you next year. Bye-bye.